looking at this person that all of your creatureliness was born out of him and oriented to him caring for you, which he did, but then something would turn and all of a sudden he was no longer there.
Right.
And what was there had nothing but malevolence for you. And I have to say, that rip has also been an opening.
They encounter the unknown directly and start to
Yes.
translate it into imagistic form, and then later the poets get there.
And they attempt to begin to bring language to it. That listening feels really familiar to me.
Is it true that this led to feelings of being misunderstood for you, perhaps even intellectually underestimated?
I started to realize, like, this question, what is money? It's a genuine mystery for you. And
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I know this guy.
Yeah.
That's something really familiar
It's
about
definitely very interesting to me.
that. Here's the mystery to me, though. How do you know to be interested in that?
Okay, welcome back.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was in the hot seat yesterday, and now it's your turn.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it was really great yesterday. I
Yeah.
really enjoyed getting to know you more, and a lot of synergy, a lot of resonance.
yeah. Well, dude, you're a really good interviewer. So tough act to follow. Hopefully, I can do at least hold a candle to what you did yesterday. So
Oh, well.
really good stuff. So I guess I wanted to start with your origin story.
Yeah.
So yesterday you did something a little different. You kind of went into the work, and then we talked about my
Yeah.
personal story.
Yeah.
I'm going to start with your personal story today.
Okay.
And you grew up in Chicago.
Yeah.
It says here you faced some early learning disabilities. I'm not
Yeah, totally.
sure about that. I didn't know at all about that. So
Yeah.
maybe we could start there in the interest of going into the
Yes.
trauma and how it shapes us.
Yeah, totally.
You don't
Right.
seem like a man that has learning disabilities. So that was caught me off guard.
Yeah, it kind of caught everyone off guard, like my parents and everybody in the school system. They didn't quite know what to really do with me, but I would say, both a little bit of context, both my parents are amazing people, and they're both suffered from addiction and alcoholism. And then everything that basically goes with that went with that, right? So there was like a lot of different things happening around that, which I think was a big part of it. I don't think it was all of it, because since I've had kids, I've realized, like, oh no, there's some kind of wiring going on that has something to do with this as well. But essentially, they couldn't teach me how to read until I was like 11, and I was shipped from school to school. Like, no one could figure it out. And what was strange is that I would go into these these different special ed programs and stuff like that, that were usually filled with like problem kids, right? Like behavioral kids. But I was like overly behaved. Like the teachers always loved me, but I just couldn't figure out how to read. And I think now I realize I have dyslexia. I'm super right-brained.
Okay.
And essentially a special ed teacher named Mrs. Brutches basically saved me with this. And this is all in retrospect, trying to like reverse engineer it. But I think basically what she did is she kind of she would take me out of the normal school a couple hours a day. And I think what she did is she taught me how to basically read using the way I process the world, which I think you could probably say is pretty right brain. And why I say that is because I actually was learning how to read and didn't realize it until after it had happened. Because I remember this one, it was really strange. There was this one day where it was Friday, and it's the day that you come home with all your graded papers and you show your parents and all that stuff. And that was always such the worst day for me. And this one day I come home, I'm like, I think in the 5th grade, and I come home and I put the thing down and I run up to my room, right? So I could avoid that interaction as normal. And I hear my mother go, "Guy, oh my God. Right. And there was this big thing about like, apparently I got like where I was getting A's and B's and all these kinds of things. And it was this kind of big deal. And I was like, I didn't even realize that I was learning how to read. So there was something that she did there that I think was really profound.
How? What did she do? First of all, when you say right brain, I mean, that is like the creative, holistic, kind of non-reductionist side of the artistic side.
Yeah.
So how did she use that to teach you how to read?
I'm not exactly sure because I remember, I don't have any memories of her like sitting down with me going like, we're going to read now. It was more like she'd come in and we'd have a conversation and we'd end up playing in this thing and going in this direction. And I never got the sense that she was actually teaching me anything. Right.
She Trojan horsed you in reading.
Yeah. It's she was very Tao in some way, right? Like Aikido. Yeah. In some way. I don't totally understand it. I don't know if that's accurate to talk about it in terms of right or left brain, but I think it's something like that. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So that was.
But your experience was you have these interactions. So when you were going through the formal teaching of reading, it just wasn't sticking.
Yeah.
And then she played some games with you or whatever she did and somehow it made it stick.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I think she kind of got, in some way, it's funny now that I think about it, it's similar to what happens in, circling, which is, I'm sure we're going to probably talk about that, which has a lot to do with really getting someone's world, right? And kind of seeing things empathetically from their perspective in a kind of a radical way. I think she kind of did that, right? In some sense, and used the way that I comported the world and then resonated with it and just did an Aikido move and had me read that way. And so it's still the case today, for example, where I seem to have a lot of my one-on-one clients like point this out to me a lot. I can't remember anyone's names, right? I can't remember birthdays. I like all these kinds of normal.
I'm Robert.
Yes, absolutely. yes. But I can sit down and I can basically tell you your whole life story and what it means to you, and I can sum up people's narrative structure of their lives, like almost like a photographic memory. And people are like, wow, I should talk to you every day. And can you summarize my life every day? Yeah. There's something.
So is that weaker semantic memory, stronger episodic? But episodic is, it sounds like it's beyond just your own life.
Yeah. Yeah.
And how do you do that? Like, so people tell you their story and then you are connecting the dots?
Yeah. It's more like I think the kind of gestalt of their life and the meaning of it for them and how different things show up and why it matters. And like, therefore that thing that they had done last week that I haven't heard about yet, I know the meaning of it and can summarize it. And people are like, I couldn't say that about my life right there. So that's always struck me. So there's something about the way my brain works that is kind of oriented that way. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense because the right brain is that holistic kind of perspective. So maybe you're just overly indexed on the right brain. Yeah. Yeah. And do you still struggle with dyslexia? Like if you, really?
Yeah, totally.
How does that feel? I mean, is it letters and words swapping places? Like
it's kind of funny. It happens verbally too. Like I'll misuse words in the wrong place.
I've never heard you do that. I mean, I've listened to you for a lot of hours. I don't think I've ever heard you.
Oh, really? Yeah. No. I'll use the wrong word sometimes, stuff like that. But what's interesting about this is I think it's had a big influence on how reading actually impacts me. Right. And I say that because I didn't start to really get into like heavy duty philosophical reading until in my like early 20s. And I just kind of did it on my own. And my experience, I could read a book and it changes my life, right? It's like an experience, right? Yeah. Reading a book, right? So encountering people like Heidegger and Milsa Ponte and Martin Buber and, all of these thinkers, like it feels like I'm going through something when I'm reading them. Yeah. And I think it has to do with One, because I don't have much expectation that I'm going to understand the particular technical detail of it, I have a kind of tolerance for not needing to know what that word means.
Okay.
Because there's something in me that's just kind of, I don't know, grasping the gestalt of what the overall shape. Yes, and I trust the specific thing. If I don't understand it now, it's going to become obvious as I go through it. Yeah. Something like that. And it's funny because I figured out, I didn't realize that I read differently maybe than other people until I actually had to start teaching circling for the first time. And, like that's been a ride, right? Learning how to try to teach this, right? Let alone do it. But then there's like teaching people to do it. That's a whole other thing. And I remember the first time I just automatically assumed, well, I'm just going to have them read all the books I read. Right. And then their mind's going to be blown and they're going to see this and then it'll become obvious. And I remember there was one book that's been really important to me, one author named Tarthang Tulku, who's a Tibetan monk that went on this whole ride and wrote a series of books that were basically Socratic style inquiries into the nature of time and space and knowledge that he would break down time and space and reality. And then he would have you do these kind of phenomenological meditative exercises that would go along with it, right? This whole inquiry thing. And it just blew my mind. And so I gave them this big, thick book called Time, Space, and Knowledge. And I gave it to them as a reading assignment. And I'm thinking to myself, I can't wait till next week because their mind's going to be blown. And then they all walk in and they all have this angry look on their face. And I was like, so how was the reading? They're like, what the fuck are you doing to us? Why are we reading about time? We're here to circle it. And I couldn't quite explain that. I was like, and I kind of realized like, oh, I think not everyone reads the same, right? And that there's something going on with me and the way I read that seems to be different than a lot of other people.
So the concepts in the book were not landing for them? Like they found it to be impenetrable? Like what was their...
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It was like impenetrable. They didn't get the point of how it applied to what they were doing. And all these levels, when they actually asked me, I had a hard time explaining it. Right. Okay. That kind of sense, that sense of things.
This makes me think of, again, something that I've heard said, I think it's Peterson, it could be someone else, but like the artists get there first in terms of the process of creating knowledge, right? Like they encounter the unknown directly and start to translate it into imagistic form. Yeah. And then later the poets get there with you're using natural language, but in a very, artistic way, not a very imprecise way, an unrigorous way. Yeah. And then it sort of gets distilled further into literature. And, at the very bottom of that process is like highly rigorous scientific literature or something like that. Totally. And so that maybe you operate as a very right brain person high on that spectrum.
I think that makes sense. I mean, I moved to San Francisco to go to art school, right? Yeah. So I'm painter, sculptor. So, and even what I do now, I'm really, I would consider myself less of like a practitioner or a philosopher, like maybe a thinker, but I feel like my mode is basically art, right? And I appreciated the thing that you just said, which I think there's really something to this, right? Because, Heidegger talks a lot about this of where it's the artist or poet, right? That kind of, in some sense, we were talking a lot about yesterday, can start to hear like a mode of intelligibility that hasn't come into the culture yet. Yeah. Right. Right. And this sense, this thing kind of glowing yet withdrawing, and they can hear it and are beckoned to it. Right. And something in them, usually kind of from their heart, right, kind of calls in, and they attempt to begin to bring language to it, right, for the first time in some sense, right. That listening feels really familiar to me.
Yeah, the listening, what are they? I mean, maybe listening to the zeitgeist to some extent, and then putting it into, initially, I mean, art's a very broad category. Like, there's probably the imagistic artists get there first, right?
Yeah.
The painters.
Yeah.
And then, again, poetry is an art form. So it starts to then get distilled into actual language.
Yes.
But there's a listening, right? I don't know if you're listening to the zeitgeist or you're listening to the cosmos or some combination of the two.
Yeah.
Even, you see like modern art, one of the worst expressions of which is like the banana duct tape to the canvas kind of thing.
Right.
Joseph Campbell said something once that the job of the artist is to mythologize the present for future generations.
Yeah.
And so they're capturing what's going on in some artistic format that future generations can look back on. And a lot of the value of art is that representation, right? They're like, it's like a window into the past.
Yes.
And so even the banana duct tape on the canvas, I think it's terrible art. Obviously, like we think, oh, what? That's ridiculous. But it is mythologizing what's actually going on in the world. That we are this, hyper consumist fiat culture.
Yes. Yes.
But I've always thought, art is so fascinating to me. I'm not operating on your wavelength, but I have a serious appreciation for people that operate on that wavelength, where I think I'm more kind of in the middle, maybe, somewhere between the poetry and the science.
Yeah.
I find myself interested.
Well, wouldn't you say that, I think we were talking about this yesterday, where like, you often refer to yourself as highly cognitive, right? Which is obviously really true. However, it seems that what calls forth your cognition is something uncognitive, right? Or beyond cognitive, right? In some sense. And the thing I got from you yesterday, as you were talking about it, is I started to realize, like, this question, what is money? It's a genuine mystery for you. Yeah. Right? Like, there's something inexhaustible about, like, I don't get the sense that you're here to get to the bottom in a deterministic way. Like, that would be disappointing if you did at some level. Like, there's something.
Yeah, I think because
there's a moreness calling, right?
Yes, because you get beyond the propositional.
Yeah.
Right, which is probably getting into your domain, right? It's one of these questions that's like, what is truth? What is beauty? What is goodness? What is justice?
Yeah.
You would think because these are very fundamental terms, they would be easily definable, right? And there would be broad social consensus on their meaning.
Yeah.
But in fact, the opposite is true, right? The most fundamental things in natural language, they're closest to, God, like the word for that, which is beyond words. Yeah. So their meanings are some of the most highly philosophically debated things. Yes. And I think money's in that domain. Yeah. Right. I don't know that anyone's, again, the question's been asked. A lot of people have written about it. Yeah. But maybe my original contribution is to put that question in that category with other philosophical transcendentals. Yeah. And not that it's necessarily that, but it's close to that.
Yeah, totally. So in some sense, I would say you find yourself with an ear hearing that, right? Yeah. Like, I would imagine in some way, like your podcast, for example, is not a thing where you're like, okay, let's plan all this out and then apply it. I get the sense that you're finding out what this question is continuously. Yeah. In some sense, you're discovering something. You have a sense of it, but it's drawing you in. That, I would say, that attunement to the mystery of it, and that it speaks to you is a kind of a call, right? Yes. And that is, I would say, that's something like the listening that we're talking about, right?
Yeah, I agree with that. iCoin Technology has released a slick new hardware wallet. It looks like a mini iPhone with a high-res 3-inch touchscreen and camera on it. The device has no Wi-Fi, no cellular connection, and no GPS. It is an air-gapped hardware wallet which uses QR codes and a camera to communicate with the Bitcoin network. It has a built-in camera which is required for air-gap operation, and it has an optional Bluetooth compatibility. It's really a brand new user interface and user experience for a Bitcoin hardware wallet. iCoin makes self-custody accessible, easy to use, and non-intimidating. It even comes with an optional custom iCoin thermal printer, so you can print out the private key and its associated QR code when you're setting up the wallet. This makes setup quick and simple. Also, it is easy to restore the wallet just by reading the seed phrase QR code with the wallet camera. And as we always talk about on this show, the only way you can truly own your Bitcoin is by having it in self-custody. So you need a device like the iCoin wallet to truly own your Bitcoin. So go to iCointechnology.com/breedlove today for 30% off the purchase of this sleek new hardware wallet. Again, that's iCointechnology.com/breedlove. If you're anything like me, you understand that Bitcoin is something we can use every day to connect, to collaborate, and to build stronger, freer communities. As true Bitcoiners, you all know we are each responsible for onboarding more Bitcoiners. That's why I chose to partner with Cowbolt, an expense splitting app that settles in Bitcoin. It can be as simple as splitting a dinner bill. Your friend covers dinner and you reimburse them, but you send it back to him in Bitcoin. Now your friend has their first sats. And as I always say, where your money goes, the mind follows. By using Cowbolt to get Bitcoin into the hands of your friends and family, you can help us orange pill the world. Cowbolt is built to let you split costs, share expenses, and settle instantly, while always keeping full control of your keys. Cowbolt is simple, social, non-custodial, exactly how Bitcoin was meant to be used. If you're serious about Bitcoin, it's time to act like it. Download Cowbolt today on iOS or Android. To learn more, go to cowbolt.com. Again, that's Cowbolt, COWBOLT.com. You've mentioned Heidegger a few times.
Yeah.
So maybe this is a good point of comparison, but
yeah,
he has that notion of truth as aletheia.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right, which is radical disclosure or unconcealedness.
Yeah.
Something I found to be very interesting in Heidegger too was that he said that technology is something that gives us additional disclosure about what is possible in reality.
Yeah.
And so that we progress along our understanding of, or we come into a deeper understanding of what is true through technological progression.
Yeah.
We talked about metaphor yesterday, and I've found it interesting that it's also new technologies that give us new metaphors, which then updates our language.
Yes.
And then our natural language leads to further innovation and more. It's like this feedback loop.
Yeah.
Where we get, hardware updates, if you will, in the technological domain that then lead to software updates in the linguistic domain.
Totally.
So to put it to shift it back over to you, is that one of those questions that's drawn you in over time?
Yeah.
I guess I could make it very broad and say, what is it about Heidegger that's been so fascinating to you? But I would like to also zero in on truth a little bit, because that I find to be another one of these very interesting questions.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that, it's funny when you think about, aletheia, right? Or aletheia.
Yeah.
I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce it.
Not either.
You could say it's where our word truth originates from, right? And it's pre-Socratic. I mean, it's like older than dirt, right? So if one way to kind of get at it is look at the term. So, Letheia, right? It was a mythological body of water, right? I think there's a river Letheia or a lake Letheia or an ocean Letheia or something like that, right? And it was considered we'll say Lake Letheia was the lake of forgetfulness, right? And now understanding aletheia, there's no, at least for me, there's no understanding aletheia. There's only realizing that you didn't totally understand Aletheia. Right? That's been my experience. It's one of those.
It can't be understood in its most fundamental sense, right?
Yeah, it's something fractal about it, right? In that way.
Back to the understand yesterday was a metaphor for standing beneath, but like the truth is always what you're standing on in the most fundamental sense.
Yeah, totally. Oh. And paradoxically, we can go back to this, but paradoxically, I would say that the technological understanding of being that Heidegger was talking about is an overstanding, right?
Yeah, right.
In a big way. So, and that's all connected to the circling. We can kind of get into that. But sticking with Aletheia, so it's like how I've understood it is like this: is so if Bob's walking along, right, and he trips and he falls in Lake Aletheia, it's not like people are walking around going, where'd Bob go? Like, where's Bob? Like, have you seen Bob lately? Right? No, it's not that kind of thing. It's when Bob trips into Lake Aletheia, Bob is totally forgotten. So it's missing from people that Bob's missing, right? It's total forgetfulness, right?
Oh, so he is vanquished from memory as well.
It's like total concealment, right? Okay. So Aletheia, right, is, you got it right there, that right? I'm fascinated with that word, right? Yeah. But that's Aletheia.
Okay.
Right there.
Yes.
This sense of the event of unconcealedness or disclosure.
Yeah.
Now, for years, I always thought of it in terms of like, what was it like what that was about was the revelation. Yeah. Right. The thing revealed.
Yes.
But as I've kind of gotten deeper into it, I've realized like, actually, no, like it's the thing that's crucial about that is it's not the revelation of Bob, which that's part of it. Yeah. But it's the revelation of concealment as such. Yeah. There's something about being as such that's disclosed, that being in its deepest sense is concealment as such. Yes, right? Yes. Yeah. And so you get this intimation of it. You know, a good example of that would be something like, I think of the movie The Sixth Sense. Remember that movie with Bruce Willis in it? This is a great example of that, where I remember I went with my wife and she was the only one that knew at the start of it, right? But like basically the movie is like, you're watching the movie, he's dead, but you don't know he's dead, right? He doesn't know he's dead. No one knows he's dead. The audience doesn't know he's dead. My wife knew he was dead the whole time, but like I didn't know he's dead. And then like right at the end of the movie, I forget exactly what happens, but something like out of the corner of his eye, all of a sudden there's this moment, right? Where he realizes, then you realize, oh my God, he's dead. And there's this kind of moment of like,
yes.
And then it goes back to the very beginning of the movie and scene by scene, it walks you through and it was obvious the whole time. It was concealed.
Right.
So the mood of that, right? The mood of truth, right? Isn't the information that he was dead. It was the concealment was revealed. Right. Right. That's the sense of.
Yeah. This goes back. Well, a number of things come up for me. The first thing you were talking about Lake Aletheia. I think Mark Twain said something like, if you always tell the truth, you never have to remember anything.
Yeah.
You know?
Right. Totally.
So that just
That's a really good point.
Felt relevant somehow. And then as you're describing the sixth sense, that you get to the end point in the movie and you get, basically certain new data point, right? Where he's revealing, the main character is in fact dead. And then that's the plot twist.
Yeah.
That forces you really to go back to the beginning of the movie and reinterpret all the facts.
Yes.
That, you interpreted it one way throughout the movie. He is alive, he's alive, he's alive. But then you get this twist at the end. You're like, oh, wait, everything that I thought was true is now the opposite.
Yeah. It puts everything at question.
Yeah. It's a total perspectival inversion.
Yes.
And then you have to reinterpret the whole thing. And I feel like we talked yesterday about listening being language like, right? It's like you're listening to the movie, you're consuming the movie.
Yeah.
but your interpretation basically is in error the whole time.
Yes.
And then it's revealed to you at the end that you were in error.
Yes.
And that's such a trip.
Yeah.
It reminded me too of Copernicus, actually.
Yeah.
That, we have the rising and setting sun for all of human history. And we're like, oh yeah, the sun goes around the earth.
Yes.
Clearly, like everyone sees it. Everyone can see it happening. We all agree to it.
Yeah.
Right. It's got social consensus. It's got empirical data. It's like so self-evidently true that the sun is going around us every day.
Yes.
We take it for granted. Yes. And then along comes Copernicus with some mathematics and says, actually, I've measured the ellipses and, the retrograde and all this stuff. It would make a lot more sense mathematically if the sun were in the center and we were going around the sun.
Right.
And then all of a sudden people have to reinterpret that data.
Yeah.
And like, oh, well, what would it look like if the earth were going around the sun instead? And as it turns out, it would look exactly like that.
Yes. Yes. Totally.
And that is so
wondrous.
Wondrous. And man, what a dose of humility.
Yeah.
Right.
Totally.
To have like global consensus on sun going around earth forever.
Yeah.
And then one guy with some math comes along and just gives you the revelation.
Totally. In some sense, we're having it right now, right? In a certain sense, like realize, unconcealment is what's revealed as such in reinterpretation.
Right.
There's something about this. And it's funny because, in the circling method, right? When we do a circling session, oftentimes, right, you'll see these people have these incredible insights. Mm-hmm. And I started to notice that thing in that movie where you see the insight and then it goes back in time and you have to reinterpret your whole history. I started noticing, right, in the process of circling, somebody would be like, right, this
epiphany,
right? Yeah. There'd be this kind of midwife moment where the baby's just born. And it's kind of like, they're looking around. Everyone knows to stay really silent and quiet. So interesting how everybody just tunes in and knows what to do in that moment. But then I started to notice through the years this pattern where at some point they went from this and all of a sudden they started doing this thing with their eyes. Right? They start with their eyes. Right? And that seems to enter some different mode. Right. I started to realize, and I just started asking people like, what are you doing there? Yeah. And they'll say something like, oh yeah, I'm realizing say the insight was about my relationship with my mother. Yeah. I'm realizing like, oh, she was loving me the whole time and I had no idea. Right. Like there's this temporal retrospective. That insight, because usually insight isn't exactly a discovery. Right. It's a revelation of what's already
of course.
The case in some sense, right? And therefore, I realize like, oh, this is how we make our history continuously, right? It's really strange, but I have to say, I've learned more from my history as more future's been added.
Yes,
right? Than I got from the actual event of that history, right? There's this way that we retrospect in that way, and insight seems to be the nexus or the opening of that. Right?
Yeah, dude, it's so beautiful. I was thinking too, I didn't say this yesterday, but we talked a bit about metaphor and how, you use a source domain.
Yeah.
We talked about the word understand, right? So the physical experience of standing beneath something, to map that onto the abstract experience of getting, bringing something into deeper comprehension, even deeper comprehension, it's metaphorical no matter which way I say it.
Yeah.
And it occurred to me that like your past, right, your memories, your experience, these are really our source domain for everything, right? All of our embodied action up until this point in our life is the frame of reference or the interpretive schema we bring to bear on understanding any new data, right? Any new experience, even meeting a new person.
Yeah.
Right. You're going to put them through the filter of your prior experiences with persons you deem to be similar across whatever domains.
Yes.
And so, I don't know. It's almost like the entire experience of consciousness is metaphorical to some extent, right? That you do have this source domain of memory, and it's the target domain is always the unknown, right?
Yeah.
The new event, the new person, the new, even the future. If you're planning for the future, like, well, how am I going to do this?
Yeah.
Well, it can only be based on what you know from the past, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Even if you're doing totally new things.
Yes. Yes.
So
this is why I would say, like, it makes sense to me that we should really seek to have a life that's high in insight.
Yeah.
Right. Like we should be drawn to things for which more of what's already there is disclosed, right? In that insightful way. Because if you don't, at some level, your history becomes a mode of blindness, right? In a certain sense, right? I think a lot of people have a relationship to their history that's quite fixed, and therefore the way the future they anticipate, the unknown, right, is always substantiated in these very fixed categories, right? And then it references itself. Yeah. Where like something like insight, where you realize the thing that you most understand reveals an inexhaustible source. Yeah. Right. That source is this updating quality, this, right? This kind of like new place where the zeitgeist, right, emerges, right, in a certain sense. Yeah.
The frame breaking and remaking.
Yes.
Right. Because you were just describing about that person that, oh, my mother was loving me the whole time.
Yeah.
Right. They had some misframing on whatever their story was. They were telling themselves about their mother's actions toward them.
Yes.
And they had this insight, which again, is not really new data.
Yeah.
They just saw their own misframing. Yeah. Right. They broke the misframing and they framed it another way and said, oh, wow, she was loving me the whole time.
Yes.
And that's radical, man.
Yeah.
Because this is why your beliefs and I guess your interpretations more broadly, I don't know, that's more broadly, more narrow, I'm not sure, but they are your identity.
Yeah.
Or like that person's identity is obviously shaped by their relationship with their mother. If they think, oh, my mom mistreated me.
Yeah.
Then that is part of their identity.
Yes. Yes.
But if they can, break the misframing and frame it another way, then they can update their very identity.
Totally. Yeah.
I want to go, I guess this is sort of a good segue back because we talked about the dyslexia learning challenges when you were young.
Yeah.
Is it true that this led to feelings of being misunderstood for you and perhaps even intellectually underestimated? And did this contribute to your, dare I say, passion for really understanding people deeply? Like obviously you have a very, you seem very intent on getting to know the individual. As you said to me something in text, right? If you follow the individual deep enough that you'll end up in kind of the metaphysics.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah, this is, I mean, maybe we can kind of discover it here together as we talk about it, because this is a mystery to me in some ways. I mean, I would say part of this, so if I talk a little bit more about just, what it was like kind of growing up, with my parents and stuff. So my dad, he grew up in the, 40s, 50s. He had two alcoholic parents. His dad was very passive and kind of distant. And his mother was a rager. And he had two older brothers. And I think she beat him pretty profusely for, quite a bit. And my sense is that my dad experienced that with his older brothers. I had a sense that he experienced a kind of ongoing sense of humiliation, right? And when you psychologically speaking, I mean, this is me kind of playing a psychologist a bit, but like, it's my dad, so who else are you going to play psychologist with, right? My sense was that kind of creates this, what they call like a narcissistic injury, right? This core wounding of yourself, right? Where like, if you have repeated humiliation, right? It's like I can't think of a worst feeling, emotional feeling other than humiliation. There's shame, which sucks, right? But then there's like public shame, right? Which intensifies it times 10. And so what ends up happening is you get this very, very, I would say, vulnerable sense of self for which you need a certain kind of mirroring to shore yourself up from others, right? Thus the term narcissism, right? And oftentimes it's associated with rage, right? And so growing up with my dad, right? But it's interesting, at the same time, my dad, right, underneath all that is it's just extraordinary. He's super funny, right? He's really bright, right? He's really charismatic, right? He's an incredible man, right? He's been sober and very involved in AA for, I think, going on 50 years. Like our relationship is, you know, we're two adults with each other now, right? Yeah. However, there was much of my childhood was about like, if you would, like, I put it like this, if the wind blew in such a way such that would at all insinuate that my dad may be wrong, he would attack, right? So any sense of him being seen in some negative light or blamed for something or that he did something wrong, he would just rage, right? And so he would like yell at people when we'd go out to dinner, right? Especially when he drank, right? It would really go off. So I had so many moments of where, and it's so interesting because there's nothing like this, right? Where you're looking at this person that all of your creatureliness was born out of him and oriented to him caring for you, which he did, but then something would turn and all of a sudden he was no longer there. Right. And what was there had nothing but malevolence for you, right? That turn, man, like for a little guy, that was like a rip. That was a rip in being, right? That was like everything turned upside down in that moment, right? In a certain sense. And I have to say, right, speaking as me now, that rip has also been an opening, right? Because I think experiencing that rip and having it at a daily basis and always anticipating it, as I've grown up, the opening, right, like has been an opening for which my life has been really kind of came out of in a certain sense. Yeah. So, but I would say in terms of the relational component of that, I adapted by, I would say, becoming so attuned to his moods. Like I could tell what kind of mood he was in by the way he pulled his car in the driveway, right? There was a sense of like like tuning into the environment, right? I always had this sense of like this, like my cognition would just, like in a way that I wouldn't let anyone know, right? Because you couldn't let them know you were doing this because that would bring it on, right? Yeah. But just this attunement to his world, right? In other people's worlds, I think was a way of adapting to that. That I think that later on in my life, which is often the case with a lot of us, right? Where our adaptations that become maladaptive when we're adults.
That's right. Yeah.
But then when you shift the context of that from like fear to like the context of love, those adaptations become these incredible gifts. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
And I credit my dad and my mom for both the situation that had that arise, but also, right, because they got sober. I also credit for them for the opportunity for that to become like my gift to the world, if you want to say it, put it like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's beautiful. I've heard it put that our wounds generate our wisdom, and so that rip you described can become an opening.
Yeah.
Right. That you, in the survival instincts that manifest in response to those circumstances, you do gain certain, maybe not superhuman, but like very high human capabilities that others don't have, a sensitivity or attunement to people's personalities. And then that makes you very gifted at what you're doing today.
Forget multivitamins and other supplements. Animal organs are the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. You can get 100 times more nutrients from organs than you can from muscle meats. But the problem with eating organs is that they are difficult to find in stores, they are difficult to prepare, and even when they are prepared well, they often don't taste great. Thankfully, Heart and Soil Supplements has made consuming organ meats so much easier by providing powderized organs in capsule form. Organ meats include everything your body needs to thrive: vitamins, minerals, peptides, proteins, and growth factors. This is why organ meats were the most prized foods for our ancestors. Fortunately for us, Heart and Soil makes these treasured foods easily accessible. So go to heartandsoil.co today and use discount code BREEDLOVE to get started on your journey to optimal health and vitality. Again, that's heartandsoil.co, discount code BREEDLOVE.
Would you rather have 1 Bitcoin today or 2 Bitcoin a few years from now? Bitcoin mining is a tried and true strategy for accumulating Bitcoin. Over a 2 to 4 year time frame, successful miners have consistently accumulated more Bitcoin than they otherwise would with a traditional dollar cost average strategy. Blockware mining as a service enables you to start mining Bitcoin from your laptop. Blockware handles everything from securing the miners to sourcing low-cost power to configuring the mining pool. They do it all. Plus, with Blockware's one-of-a-kind mining marketplace, you can buy and sell live Bitcoin miners with just a few keystrokes. In this marketplace, buyers get to purchase live machines at vetted facilities, enabling them to mine with zero lead time. And sellers get the opportunity to liquidate their machines and hosting contracts at will. This means you can mine Bitcoin with zero long-term commitment and high liquidity on your mining rigs. Blockware will even cover your energy bill for 1 week per mining rig when you sign up at mining.blockwaresolutions.com/breedlove. Again, that's 1 free week of Bitcoin mining at mining.blockwaresolutions.com/breedlove. And on top of this offer, you can also use code BREEDLOVE to get $100 off your first mining rig with Blockware Solutions. I want to go into one thing that you said there because it almost exactly mirrored what you said to me yesterday about my mother going through, how it becomes a ripping being, and you use the term malevolence towards you. And I think I assume this means towards you as a young boy.
Yeah.
I'm curious about that because I don't know. I don't think, speaking from my own experience, I don't think it was malevolence of my mother towards me.
Yeah.
And so I think it's more like she's lost in the sauce kind of thing. You know, like it felt very blank.
Yeah.
The voidness when you would look into her eyes, it was just like no one's home.
Yeah.
Was it that for you, or do you think there was, authentic evil intent, let me make my son suffer type of thing?
I'll put it like this. It's like, so a big component of this is like when he would go into like blackouts, right? He'd often come home and then I would kind of be woken up with him beating my mother, right? So he would go into these deep regressions, I think, when he got drunk. And then my mother would just become basically his mother and all of his rage would come out, right? And so, and I would got to this point where I would manage the fight. I remember being like 6 years old and like crying at just the right time to break up the energy because I could tell he was going to kill her, like that kind of thing, right? Jeez. So there was a real... And it's funny. It's not even like my dad had malevolence. It was like my dad was gone, right? And something else was taking over, right? In a certain sense, right? That was very unprocessed, if you want to say.
Yeah.
So, when it would turn towards me, it was mostly he was gone. And I was something else, right? I was everything that he hated in that moment. I was the burden. I was the problem. I was the locus of that. It was so, because my dad's also really bright. And so he would I remember asking these questions that were just double bind after double bind after double bind, right? To be like, why did you do that? And it was so clear. If I answered the question, I was fucked.
Yeah.
Right. If I didn't answer the question, I was fucked. And so I just was like, right. And just kind of like wait for it to be over and hope for the best. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was that kind of thing.
Oh, dude, I'm so sorry.
Oh, thank you.
It sounded too, God, it's like people, like they were doing a form of shadow work in a way, like they didn't know it.
Yeah.
But, you know, he's in his unconscious pattern, he's in rage, and then mom goes into pretending like she's his mother, right?
Yes.
So he can, I had a guy on here, David Sutcliffe, and he talked about these psychodramas that they actually practice in shadow work.
Yeah.
Where someone will pretend to be someone's father or mother.
Yeah.
You know, the object of their rage. And then the person who's doing the shadow work gets to say all the unsaid things to the mother or father they never said.
Yeah.
And then at the end of it, you know, the father or the mother will hold the child in their arms.
Yeah.
And the person then like releases.
Yeah.
So it's like, not to excuse what they were doing. Obviously they're going about it the wrong way and using alcohol and all of these things, but there's like almost
an attempt
to try and process the unconscious
that's brilliant
pattern, but they, instead of processing it, they just end up imitating it.
Yeah. And that intuition has been so core to coming for me. I mean, this happened years ago for me, of healing from it and really forgiving them.
Yeah.
Like recognizing that underneath that was a misguided attempt to resolution.
Right.
Right. Like it's like even that there's you can hear the good.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and it's that good that I think what afforded me to be able to approach that in a way that wasn't like with a victim self-righteousness and like, you know, and come to a place of genuinely forgiving him.
Yeah.
Right?
And thank God for that, because that is you relating with a deeper truth, right? It'd be very easy to just surface level say, woe is me. I am the victim. I was 6 years old. My parents were drunk. They were hurting me, hurting each other.
Yeah.
And then you would then go into your own victimhood narrative.
Yeah.
And very likely you would repeat that unconscious pattern in your victimhood, right? The victimhood itself being a form of narcissism.
Yeah.
Or like the whole world is out to get you.
Totally.
And like, that's not true, obviously. The whole world's not out to get anyone.
Yes.
And so do you think so that's interesting. This is also true in AA, right? You said your father's in AA.
Oh yeah.
We had a guy on here talking about addiction where it's like I don't know if it's the first step or a primary step is like, you have to stop lying, basically. The addiction and the lying go hand in hand. Like if you're going to overcome it, you need to admit that there's a problem that you really need to fix.
And admit your utter powerlessness over your problem.
Yes.
That you've done everything that you could possibly do.
Right.
And that you hit a place where you have got to admit powerlessness.
Yes.
Right. Is the very beginnings of another kind of power. Right.
Yes.
In a certain sense coming. Yes.
Yeah. The truth is that you need help, right? Like you've basically exhausted all of your options or competencies and now you need someone's help.
Yes.
So that was when you said you were 6.
Yeah.
You know, mediating or trying to diffuse these arguments. Did that persist for your whole childhood? Like how did that?
So like that was really early years, I would say. The violence that way was intermittent, right? They would kind of correlate with him going into blackouts and stuff like that. But when I was 12 is when my mother got sober and then my father got sober, and we moved from Chicago to Arizona. And that's when they really got involved in AA, right? And that was it's funny in my mind, they're totally different universes, right?
Yeah.
That exist. Yeah. Yeah.
So then things got better after that, I assume.
Yeah. Yes. It was crazy. I mean, the only thing worse than, you could say, drinking alcoholics or newly sober, right? Alcoholics.
Yeah, right.
Right? Like,
they don't have their crutch anymore.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And that was, another part I think is probably important if we're going to kind of go into my history a bit, is like, the other part of that was my relationship with my grandfather. who on my mom's side. He, I think, sensed, although this is all I was born in 72, like 1970s, early 80s. You just didn't talk, no one talked about, right? It was taboo to talk about the inner dynamics of your family, sure. Right? So my mom never talked about it with me. She would always kind of come to me in this weird way to save her. And I kind of hated her for it because I didn't know how, but I didn't know how to do it. Like that was a really, that engulfment kind of thing really did wonders for my future relationships with women.
Yeah, right? I'm sure. Yeah.
But I had my grandfather and grandmother were extraordinary.
Yeah.
They were kind of strange parents, but like, I think, it's funny, out of all the kids and the cousins and everything, my grandfather, I think for whatever reason, just picked me just to pour his life into me. He poured himself into me. I mean, the Pastor Paul, part of the one of the people on this little corner of the internet, right? They were talking about. I had a conversation with him, and he used that term, and I was like, "Yeah, that's exactly the term. They poured themselves into
kenosis,
you."
Right?
Yeah. And my grandfather was an extraordinary man, right? Really unique guy. He was raised on a farm in Germany, Hanover, Germany. Like he was one of, I think, 17 brothers and sisters, right? Because like if you're on a farm back then, right?
Yeah.
You had kids to help on the farm, right? And he escaped, like he snuck out and escaped, and he became, he moved in to be an apprentice of a tailor, right? And he ended up being a pretty famous tailor, actually, in the Chicago area. Like Chuck Comiskey from Comiskey Park, the Cubs, would like get his suits made by my grandfather. But he always talked about like, he with 50 cents in his pocket. I don't even know if that's actually true, but like that was always a story. Yeah, with 50 cents in my pocket, I came to America, right? And like started Hoff Cleaners. His last name was Hoffmeister in Hinsdale, Illinois, which is kind of an upper middle class suburb of Chicago. And he had this whole world of, on one level, he was this really successful businessman, right? He was this apprentice master tailor, but he was also one of the top amateur photographers in the world. He was, tell these things, like he was the first person to ever catch on film a tiger fight in the Amazon ever.
Wow.
Right? Like,
interesting.
Yeah, he would do anything for a picture, right? Where he's this little short German. He was like 4'11".
Wow.
And he was constantly fucking with people. He was constantly teasing me and everyone else. He was like super playful that way. And he could get away with almost everything, like anything, right? But like he told me stories of, my grandma actually told me this story where he wanted to get the shot of the buffalo when they were traveling. And so he hopped the fence and he gets really close, and then they turned and they started going after him, and they ran him up a tree, and he was sitting out there for like 3-4 hours until he finally was able to get down and like, and he would do that again. He had this exploratory sense of wonder, I would say. He collected everything. He collected stamps and coins. He had a basement that was like, he's just a really interesting guy. He collected all these Hummels, and he would have these epic, back at that time, now this is before all digital stuff, right? He would have these slideshows. He's famous for these slideshows where he'd go on a trip and everyone would come down, and all the relatives would come down, and all of his friends would come down, and we'd like cook a big dinner, and we'd sit down and we'd start the slideshow, and he'd tell these stories of this trip, right? And he's just that kind of being that just had a tremendous amount of wonder, right? For life. And he basically took me in, I think. I think he sensed, with maybe not even knowing it consciously, that like something was not good going on, right? And I think that he'd pick me up from school every day. I spent a lot of time over there. And I think my grandfather was really, really attuned into this sense of wonder in me, and like saw it, I think nurtured it, provided for it. Like, you know, of course I was struggling. I remember specifically one incident. This is so classic grandpa, where, you know, of course they're trying to get me to learn how to read. And so they would write all these things that I had to do that day and have them check it off and stuff like that. And then he'd pick me up from school. I'd give him the book and he'd look at it. He's like, he just threw it down. He's like, what do you want to do? And he would just set up whatever it is, wherever my imagination went.
That's awesome.
He would just do that. Right. Yeah. And he just delighted in me, right. In a certain sense. So there's something really important going on, I think, with my grandfather that nurtured, saw and nurtured a part of me, right? Like that sense of wonder, I think. Yeah.
That's amazing. I wonder if he probably saw a lot of himself in you, I would imagine. It sounds like he was a guy immersed in wonder, right? Doing all these adventurous different things.
Yes.
So that's, and I assume too, you talked about like pouring himself into you.
Yeah.
That word kenosis, meaning like self-emptying love.
Yes.
You know, that there is, I don't know, you reach a certain point in life and it's not sudden, it's gradual, but maybe more sudden when you have children, probably even amplified to a whole nother degree when you have grandchildren, that you really come to the realization that the deepest fulfillment is in that self-emptying, right? That pouring into other people.
That agape.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So, and maybe, I'm sure if he was attuned, as you said he was, he knew there was something going on at home too. So all of those things, right? Seeing himself in you. Being attuned to something being wrong at home. Being a grandfather, right? Makes a lot of sense that he would want to do that for you. That was, I assume that was a shining part of your life then, right? That time you spent with him.
And also both my dad, another part of this too is, I think it's an important part of my history, is my grandfather and my dad are total storytellers, right? Like they have so many stories, and I couldn't get enough of my grandpa's stories and my dad's stories. Like I would ask them over and over and over again to hear the same story, right? Like my grandpa would pick me up from school and I would just like want to hear all the story. I've probably heard the stories 8,000 times and I never, there's something about them and them being a storyteller that I think allowed a kind of listening that was maybe innate in me, but really oriented me that way, right? Same thing with my dad. My dad's an incredible storyteller, right? And can kind of create maps and worlds with language, right? And I was so drawn into that, right? And would bond with them there. Yeah.
Is that what, because you did eventually have an interest in writing. I'm sorry. This is actually your athletic life.
Yeah.
I wanted to go there first.
Yeah.
Wrestling, weightlifting. Obviously you still work out. It's become a lifelong thing, I assume. Obviously I very similar to you, kind of started young and have kept it up throughout most of my life.
You started when you were 11, right?
11, 12.
Yeah, right in that
I guess sport at 11, then Olympic lifting at 12.
Yeah.
So it's
that's
been
early.
a long time. You know, it's been 3/4 of my life at this point.
Yeah.
What, how did that shape you? Like, how did that influence who you became?
That's a great question. Hardly anybody asked me about that. But I would have to say, so it's a couple things. So I got involved with sports, I think, Little League and Pop Warner football pretty early, like 9, 10, right around there. And it would always, I have no natural kind of athletic abilities. I'm super have no natural coordination. But I hated not being good at it. So I would I'm also an only child. So I would develop ways to practice on my own. Right. And my favorite movies were Rocky movies, right? Okay. So the underdog, right, was a real mythos for me, right? I watched that movie so many times in my life, right? Just that sense of being an underdog and like working really hard. And that mythos was a core mythos that I kind of grew up in a certain sense, and would drive me. And so I'd suck the first year, and then the next year, then I would practice. And then the next year I'd be on the all-star team. Right. And I would say sports were the first place where I got that sense of sociality, right? In that sense of competitiveness, right? And because before then I didn't really talk to anybody. I was like really just observant, like, but didn't really relate with anybody. And it was sports that brought me into a sociality for the first time, right? And so becoming good at something and then being seen and valued for that was huge, right? Like that. And I think that's the case for a lot of people, right? Sports are an amazing way to kind of be initiated into a social context, right?
Yeah.
It's one of the few ways I think that we still have in our culture that have that embodied, right? Embedded sense of, you know,
the rite of passage sort of thing.
Yeah. I think that probably happens. One of the few places that still happens for us. So that was huge for me. And then when I was 11, my dad wanted to start working out, and he took me with him to Grove Gym. We lived in Downers Grove, and it was called Grove Gym. And it happened to be that Carlton Fisk, right, who is he's most famous for being a catcher in Boston, right, called Fudge, right, that then came to the White Sox and finished his career as White Sox. He was my hero. And he happened to be, apparently lived in that town and worked out at that gym. And I remember my dad would take me in there, and Carlton Fisk was there. And there was something about that like just burned weightlifting and like my favorite baseball player of all time, burned it into my memory. It just went like this. And so I just started lifting weights with my dad, and eventually my dad kind of like didn't want to do it anymore. And then I kept asking him about it. We moved to Arizona, and then finally my dad got me a trainer at the sports rec in this kind of, you know, hardcore basement gym in Cottonwood, Arizona. And that's where I would say that like I had this trainer who was really neurotic, right? Such that if I go after school 3 days a week, and if I didn't show up, he'd call the cops and report me missing.
Wow.
Like he was pretty hardcore.
Jeez.
Yeah. And I distinctively remember, it was like within the first few weeks of that, like distinctly remember this one moment that had changed, is probably the most impactful things that has ever happened to me, right? In a positive way. Because I remember just being sore, right? Like, and dreading going, and I'm like, why am I doing this? And like forcing myself to do it because I'm just sore, and it hurts, and none of my friends are doing this, but I'm doing this. And then there was this day, was probably like the second or third week, where I'm doing these bicep curls, right? And I'm, 13, right? Like a little teenager, just the beginnings of testosterone are coming on. And I'm doing curls, and I look in the mirror, and and I'm feeling this burn and hating it. But then all of a sudden I recognize there's this gap between, right, my elbow and my bicep that wasn't there the time before. And in that moment, I was like, that pain was connected to this improvement in your body. Yeah. Right. And there was this feeling of empowerment that was linked with this burn that just sealed it for me.
Yeah.
And I have not stopped working out, with the exception of maybe a few months one time since.
Wow.
Yeah. It's huge.
Yeah.
It's huge.
Yeah. And I've had these strange experiences where I've done a lot of different types of sport or working out over the years.
Yeah.
And, for instance, I did yoga very seriously from like the age of 21 to like 31. So about 10 years.
Wow.
And I swear, as my body became more physically flexible, I became more cognitively flexible.
Interesting.
Like I used to be very, prior to that, I was like, I would go really hard in one domain. It was like, I mentioned astrophysics was a thing. And then like, it'd be the stock market or economics. Then I'd be into like Eastern philosophy.
Yeah.
But then when I got into yoga, I don't know, I started to get more flexible. Like I would go cross domain and could make different connections. And I don't know, that was always something that struck me. And then now I've kind of been on a yoga hiatus for the past 8 years. Mm-hmm. And I've noticed the flexibility decline too. And so like I'm still somewhat flexible. I'm trying to get back into it, but I do think there's a deep connection there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then one of the, I guess it's almost a trope on the show at this point. I got it from Taleb, I'm pretty sure. There's a saying that pain is information, right? Like it is the thing that puts, pain is the process by which things are put into a new formation. Yeah. Right. So that physical description you described, like, oh, my body was actually in a new physical formation. Yeah. But you connected it and anchored it to the sensation of pain. Yeah. And all of a sudden you get in touch with that furnace of change. Totally. And it's not just physical, right? It could also be, reading those books you described. That are difficult, hard, you know, like, I don't know that I understand this, but I'm going to do this and hope, by the end of it, it changes you.
Yes, totally.
Puts you into a new formation cognitively or spiritually or whatever the thing may be.
Yeah. Yeah. And so like, I crave the burn. Yeah. Like literally like if I go too long without it, I get kind of like antsy, right? There's this, you're right. It does generalize into, because to create something in the world, you can't just say it and then it falls in your lap. Exactly. It's you encounter tons of resistance, right? So if you have a shift, if you have an association with certain kinds of bearing and suffering that you actually don't just tolerate, but you crave.
That's right.
That's huge.
Yeah.
And I would say that thing of all the things I've done in my life, weightlifting has been this consistent through line that has probably, because I have a tendency to be pretty chaotic, right? And go in a lot of different directions and stuff like that. Yeah, same. But that wax on, wax off, lift heavy things, get till one gets stupid, right? Yeah. Every single day. That has been like, that's been the thing that's made the most difference for me. Yeah,
same. I feel extremely fortunate to have gotten into it early. Yeah. And now, I mean, when I was young, it was just for sport, it actually was sport, Olympic weightlifting itself. Right. It initially was training for sport to get bigger for football and wrestling, but then it became a sport in and of itself. Yes. But now that I've learned, it's the number one way to prevent cognitive decline, is resistance training. Yes. For me too, my personality tends to be a bit extremist or even addictive. Like I get into a thing and I'm really into it. And so to have that consistent through line of weight training as like something to always go back to, and almost like a healthy addiction too. Yeah. And the discipline, the goal orientation, the visualization, all the things that you need to progress in that domain have also generalized to other domains in my life. And so I just feel tremendously fortunate.
Yeah. In some sense, it's it's a kind of like spiritual practice. In a certain level. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely meditative. There's a ritual.
Yeah. And man, I live for the stupids. Like I love getting to failure and like, it's like little deaths. Yeah. Like
yes.
I call it dumb guy's enlightenment.
Yeah. For me, it's doing so much of this cognitive work. Yes. I feel like I would go absolutely insane if I didn't have that other end of the barbell, to use the barbell metaphor. To just go into the gym and actually turn on. I used to listen to podcasts when I would do it, but then I found I was still in the cognitive zone. I'm like, no, I got to go listen to music and really like let the animal out to play.
Yeah. What kind of music do you like to listen to when you lift?
I've gone through phases. It used to be early days was like Metallica. Yeah. Kind of
metal totally works. Yeah.
Rock metal. Yeah. And then it became hardcore hip hop for a while, like gangster rap hip hop. And then as I've gotten into Bitcoin, I've stopped appreciating the lyrics and the, kind of the general attitude and mentality of rap and hip hop. It's just, I listen to it now. I'm like, this is garbage. Like what they're saying is just, I don't identify with any of these things in life. So now I listen mostly to deep house. So it's like electronic, hypnotic, but very high tempo.
Totally.
And I really think that is the best workout music.
Yeah, me too.
Because it puts you in that trance state, but it's also very high tempo. So you're moving a lot.
Totally. I was actually, when I moved to San Francisco, Jerry, who we were the two main guys that kind of found circling in the beginning. He was in the whole rave culture, right? And he initiated me into that. So house music, I don't know what it is about house music, right?
So good.
I ended up becoming a DJ, and like I had, by the time and I had like 10,000 records or something like that, like tech house, and there's a whole world of that I don't completely understand, but there's something profound going on in house music.
Yes, for sure. It's so good.
Yeah.
Well, also it's kind of a testament to the digital age in a way. Like I love how it blends all these different genres.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like once you get into the house domain, it's like you don't like there's classical, there's country, there's this, there's that. And it just somehow blends it all into this new thing.
Totally.
And there are subsets of house, obviously. But I find it to be very fascinating, frankly, this. And I'm not a musician. I don't play any instruments. I don't do anything, but I do take a little bit of pride in like creating really good playlists.
Yeah.
And, when you go on trips and people are like, wow, this is really good. Again, I'm not writing it or creating it. I'm just finding it. Yeah. But then compiling it is something I really enjoy.
Well, this speaks to something about what I discovered as a DJ, right? Is people usually think like, well, what's the what's the medium, right? And people usually think, well, it's music, obviously. That's not the medium, right? The medium of a DJ is the mood, right? A DJ is cooking a mood, an attunement, and right. So like the songs, right, and the music are you could say are the instruments, right, or the tools, right? Okay. That what you're really minding, right, is the attuning the room, and there's nothing like, the bass line breaks down and you're in this kind of like harmonic kind of atmospheric thing. And then then the beat comes back on and you turn up the thing and then you watch your thumbs turn and then all the women's hips turn, right? It's like, there's nothing cool. like that. Yeah.
That's so cool.
It's nothing like that. Totally.
Have you ever wanted to start a business in the Bitcoin space? If so, then the Wolf Startup Accelerator could be for you. Wolf is the first startup accelerator dedicated exclusively to businesses developing in the Bitcoin Lightning Network. 4 times each year, Wolf brings teams from around the world to New York City to work with like-minded entrepreneurs, pushing the boundaries of what's possible with Bitcoin and Lightning. The program is designed to help early-stage companies achieve product-market fit, develop their brand, secure early-stage funding, and grow businesses that fuel the global adoption of Bitcoin. Go to wolfnyc.com to learn more or apply today. Again, that's Wolf, WOLFNYC.com. Bitcoin custody is evolving. Both self-custody and single third-party custody come with significant risk and trade-offs. Onramp is pioneering a new standard, multi-institution custody, which eliminates single points of failure, adding fault tolerance and redundancy to your setup. Onramp secures your Bitcoin in a segregated cold storage multi-sig vault guarded by 3 independent institutional-grade custodians, none of which that have unilateral control over your assets. More than just security, Onramp simplifies inheritance and estate planning, ensuring your Bitcoin wealth moves seamlessly to your loved ones without the risk and complexities of self-custody. Easily designate beneficiaries right in the Onramp dashboard, eliminating the need for unreliable treasure maps or other complex key-sharing schemes. You can also avoid the probate process and ensure your heirs receive their Bitcoin securely with legal title transfers designed to keep your wealth intact for generations. As Bitcoin continues to appreciate, Onramp helps you seamlessly access financial services, from inheritance and insurance to trading, loans, IRAs, and more, all without compromising on security. And importantly, the onboarding process is fast and frictionless. I set up my own Onramp account, and it was far easier than dealing with hardware wallets or traditional self-custody setups. The team walked me through everything step by step, making sure I had a secure, reliant setup for my Bitcoin wealth. Secure your generational wealth with confidence. Schedule a consultation with the Onramp team today at onrampbitcoin.com/breedlove. Again, that's onrampbitcoin.com/breedlove.
I've always been really fascinated with some of the songs I like most. Just have these gorgeous blends of like masculine, feminine, you know, like bass line, and then it'll like kind of fade and go into some angelic music for a while. And then you reach a crescendo and then boom, the bass comes. And that blending is so good.
It's so good.
And so much fun. And it's obviously you get to share it with people. And then when you find a song other people like, oh my God, let me get that song. And it's a very social thing too.
Totally.
One of the things that came up for me on the topic of weight training, because this is obviously an area we both identify. We've both been doing it since we were kids. We both also like to read these very difficult books that break our brain. Are we mapping our weight lifting, weight training philosophy onto our literary habits? I mean, are you reading mostly nonfiction as well?
Yeah.
Same here. A lot of really hard nonfiction. Try to go in the direction of things that I'm thinking about. Like, I don't understand this thing. You know, I'm trying to plug a gap in my understanding. So let me go into, you know, for instance, what's a for instance here? I was recently really fascinated with this gap between subjective and objective, right? You know, Philosopher talks about this transjective, et cetera, but Merleau-Ponty. Wait, now he wrote, I'm sorry, Gibson. Sorry, not Merleau-Ponty. Gibson.
Although they're very close.
Gibson is the one that wrote Ecological Approach to Visual Perception. Him talking about affordances. And there's so many times in that book, I mean, dozens, where he's like, this is neither subjective nor objective. It's real. So that was like, in thinking about the delta between subjective and objective and how it's not, these aren't actually primary ontological categories. They're somewhat arbitrary, albeit useful. I found this one really hard book. And as I'm reading it, it's just breaking my brain, but it keeps feeding me that thing that I'm looking for, like really good arrangements of words that describe the thing that I'm trying to learn more about. Do you think your weight training habit has contributed to your appreciation for very difficult reading?
It feels, I mean, that feels right for sure. Right. Like, and that's probably important. It feels right.
Like resistance training of the mind.
This sense of, you know, it's interesting because where our word relation comes from, relata, right? Originally meant to bear.
Oh, I didn't know that. Interesting.
Like, so to, and that makes sense. It's like when you really take on a relation, you really bear it, right? Like, and in that way that when I know you intimately or through a friendship, right? Or through a community or fellowship, the knowledge I have of you is synonymous with, in some sense, being changed by you, right? This kind of bearing or suffering through something. And there's something about the bearing of weight, right? In this very, you know, raw way, and the bearing of relationality feels very similar to the bearing of a text, right? In that way.
Okay.
But I think that there's something about, you even said like,
when you say bearing, you mean load bearing, right?
Okay. I think about, you could also think bearing in this way of, you know, more the classical epistemology where it's like
contact epistemology.
Contact epistemology, where it's like a conformity, sense, where it's not just have the right proposition, right? It's coming into contact with what you're learning, and the form is what you both share, right? And co-shape each other in that sense.
Which is very affordance-like.
And you can hear the word, you can hear me using these words, right? Like this kind of, I think, is telling. There's another aspect to it though, too, that I think you mentioned when you were reading, when you were like, yeah, it's like this, I'm struggling with this text, but it's it's heading me in the direction of the thing I'm interested in.
Yeah.
Here's the mystery to me though. How do you know to be interested in that?
Man, I don't know.
Right? Like it's weird, especially when you think about it. It seems to presuppose being able to be interested in it presupposes that there's some way in which I know it or I'm here, but I don't know it. Thus I'm interested in it, right? There's something transjective going on with that interest.
Yeah.
And I think both in relation, right, and in that struggle, that bearing and reading, that there's something's calling to us. And that I think is a really essential in reading, right?
Yeah.
And oftentimes I don't know what it is, right? Until it unfolds more.
Yeah.
In fact, along the way, I think I'm talking about the thing that I'm talking, what I'm interested in. And then I realize, oh, actually that wasn't it. It was this, right? And this kind of, this revealing of a horizon of some kind, right? Yeah.
Yeah, we're back in the logos again, right? It's sort of like shining forth, but withdrawing.
Yes.
We're trying to follow it.
Yes.
The word interest, right? Inter-esse.
Yeah.
Between essences.
Yeah.
When you ask that question, like, how do we know what to be interested in? I don't know.
Yeah.
This captures what it is or not, but the feeling for me is something like you're creating a worldview.
Yeah.
And then there's somewhere where like, it is often revealed to me if someone asks me a question where it identifies a gap in that worldview. Like there's a discontinuity somewhere.
Yeah.
Imagine like a sphere, it's kind of like what you're going for, but it's got these cracks in it.
Yeah.
And how did you go from here to there?
Yeah.
And so that becomes a thing where I'm like, well, how do you go from, and then that becomes a point of interest. Like the crack is like where you enter into.
Yeah, totally.
And then you end up in some, esoteric book about something you can barely understand. And
totally.
But I don't know. I don't know what is actually happening. That's just what it kind of feels like.
Well, even with that, it's really interesting. It's kind of like, I know that I see a crack in there, but I only see that crack in relationship to what it's cracked from or out of.
Right.
That is mysterious.
Yes.
Right. But yet it's somehow intimate at the same time.
Yeah.
Right. This kind of, I think it's something to do with, Desmond has this term called the intimate universal, right? Like it's very much about the metaxu, that things that are most ultimate are all, they disclose themselves in what's most near, right? And even that like a question has that structure, right? A question, when you really think about a question, it's like, a question is a question because I don't know the answer. That's the question.
Right.
Yet, in some sense, the answer is present in some way in order to ask the question, right? So do I know the answer? There's this kind of sense of otherness, right? Of like it's like something ultimate, beyond me, yet intimate to me at the same time. That when that has the right tautness, right? That I think is that when we're most alive.
Interesting.
Right? We're most,
what
probably
did you call
most
that?
human.
The
actually.
Universal intimate? Is that what did you call it?
Yeah, he calls it the intimate universal.
Intimate universal.
Yeah.
So those things which are most universal are also most intimate to us.
Yeah.
Wow, I have to look into that.
Yeah.
Because that, I think, like we were talking before we recorded yesterday, that I'm formulating this. I'm not my idea. Actually, I feel like just a synthesizer of ideas ultimately. But where I'm currently at with it. My intention is to take Mises's axiom of action into something like ontological ultimacy. Yeah. Right. That no matter what we say or do, or it's like, it's all human action for us. Like, it doesn't mean that doesn't mean that's what exists out there. Obviously we're a product of what's out there has led to us. But that would be interesting in terms of that, like what is most universal would obviously be what's most intimate. That the thing, you know, the ontological ultimacy of action is also what you're doing all the time, no matter what you think, say, or do.
Right. And so there's something about, like, in this case right now, it's like something about action and ultimacy, right, has really got your attention.
For sure.
Yeah.
And it's captured in these like adages, you know, talk is cheap.
Yeah.
Actions speak louder than words, etc.
Yeah. It's funny, when we were talking yesterday, when I came in, like we first sat down and we were talking about all kinds of stuff. And then you started talking about this. And I was like, it was clearly like, that's where all life was for you in that moment. Right. Like, and we were like right in there, and I was like, oh, I know this guy. That's something really familiar about that.
It's definitely very interesting to me right now, you know, like to see, I'm like deep in the Neoplatonism, reading about all these things. And then also, you know, the Austrian economics and action over here. And I'm like, no, I don't see many connection points between them. I see many connection points between them, but I don't see any of it having been formally explored by anyone. So for me, that's very exciting. It's like, oh, am I on some new ground here? You know?
Right.
And,
totally.
It's, you know, maybe it's a very large crack in kind of our collective worldview, perhaps, you know, like we have a lot over here, we have a lot over there, but no one's bridged the two worlds.
Yeah.
So there's the metaxu is
totally. And the sense of wonder. Yeah, this is one of the things that Socrates and Aristotle, they said, like, philosophy begins in wonder, right?
Yeah, of course.
And wonder is really interesting. Like, I wrote this little piece on wonder that I've been working on for a while. It's because wonder is really interesting when you think about this. As distinct from, we'll say, maybe two versions of wonderment, or two, you know, cousins of wonderment. Like, one could be, say, something like awe, right? And the other one would be something like curiosity. Like awe, right, is usually this experience where the sunset is so extraordinary, it literally, it blows my categories.
Yes.
That's awe.
Right.
And it has this sense that the world really does all the work, right? And like my meager mind just gets shattered, right? Awe. And that can be incredible, right? And transforming. And I hope we have tons of that. And then the other side, I would say, is curiosity, which I think people interchange wonder and curiosity a lot, but I think they're really different. Curiosity is where, when wonder moves towards determination, right? Where like maybe it leads to perplexity, and in order to like deal with all that indeterminacy, right, we'll move towards wanting to ground it in like a univocal determination, let's say. And so curiosity has this, it's like hunger, right? So when you're curious, it's really about ending the curiosity, right? So it's like, I'm curious. We all know this, like, you know, we're curious about some supplement, right? And you're like, spend a day on Google, like hunting all this stuff down. And then when you kind of get the answer, you're like, oh, okay, got it, right? And you're no longer curious.
Right.
So curiosity is more like, it's more in the problem solving mode, right? In the having mode, if you will. Or wonder, right, it's really distinct, because wonder, right?
You don't want to solve the sunset.
It's usually when, for example, like a common moment of wonder for people that probably everyone could relate to at some level. It's like, at some point, you know, your mom's your mom, right? And she's your mother, and she's so your mother that you don't even know that you have her as your mother because that's just her. And then maybe you go off to college and you come back for summer, and like you're sitting at the table, and all of a sudden she says something, and you're like, she's a person. Like, she's a person. Like, she's a person distinct from me. She has her own feelings and perspectives and there's that moment where what was once most familiar opened itself up and revealed a dimension, right? It's not a total disclosure. It intimated something that has this experience of being called to it, right? Another example would be something like if you were I was thinking about this the other day, like, you know, went in your bedroom and you slept there like every night of your life. And then you sat down on the bed and you leaned against the wall that had been there your whole life. And this time when you lean against it, it gives way to a door. And there's a little crack to another room. In that moment, what you're probably experiencing is utter wonder, right?
Wonder how that got there.
So it's got this sense of wonder has to do with the disclosure of what's most near. And this is why it's connected to insight, right? And intimacy, right? That's wonder.
Yeah.
And I get this feeling, essentially what is attuning you, right, in these books really is about wonder.
Yeah, I think so.
I would imagine.
You know, as you were distinguishing those two things, wonder and curiosity, that there's something about an infinite game to wonder. Yeah. Right? You want to keep having more wonderful experiences, right? They're sort of innately valuable. Yeah. Even intrinsically valuable, which I'll hesitate to say because we always decry that in economics, but there are like experiences that are just you appreciate for their own sake. But the curiosity seems to be much more of a finite game that you're trying to get to the questions and ask the right questions. Yeah. Which is to, you know, to go on the right quest, you know, quest, to come to the right answers, you know, to find the destination of the quest. Or you could also, I've also wondered as well, are all unanswered questions are the same as unsolved problems, right? A question is basically a problem in a way, right? And a problem is a question. Yeah. I'm not sure that there's a problem that isn't a question or a question that isn't a problem. Like they seem almost indistinguishable to me. I could be wrong about this. It's just something I'm thinking about. But the purpose, as you were saying, is to resolve them, right? You want to bring them into resolution. Yeah. Yeah. And then move on to other questions and lines of curious inquiry, let's say. Yes. But the wonder thing is something else, right? It's well, you were saying too, like it blows apart your categories, right? That no matter how finely, no matter in what, how do you say this? The highness of resolution, like the granularity of resolution that we bring to bear on reality. Yes. No matter how finely detailed or pixelated our categorical structures are, there's always the things that are intercategorical. Bingo. Right? The map is not the territory. The territory is always receding. And so that is like that's beauty, isn't it? Isn't that beauty? Like the beauty is always...
Yeah, especially if the intercategorical seizes you. Yeah. Right? In a way that you find yourself seized by, and then you maybe start to bring into words. Yes. That's beauty.
Yes. Yeah. And it's a strange one too, because it might be related to the sublime. I've heard this was, again, Joseph Campbell said something like, because, Vervaeke says this too. It's not just the wonderful, amazing, nice things that can blow your categorical structures. It's also the utterly horrific, monstrous, terrible things. Yeah, totally. And horror. So, it could be either one, right? Either one is just like, it's so, you're not ready for it, right? Your categorical structures aren't ready for that experience, good or bad. Yeah. And the example Joseph Campbell gave was, I don't recall exactly what it was, but it was a witness during World War II that saw like the air bombing of a city. Yeah. You know, right before their eyes. Yeah. And they asked him like, well, what was it like? Like you saw this city getting leveled. And he just said, it was sublime. Like he couldn't handle it, you know? Yeah. And so that wonder thing is like, what was the definition of beauty he gave? He said, beauty is an angel that looks like it could kill you, but decides not to.
Say that one more time. Beauty
is an angel that looks like it could kill you, but decides not to.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
And so it is this
also
sort of...
sounds like my wife.
I was like, I said the same thing to my wife, which is strange. Says something about us, I guess.
Yeah, totally.
But there is this like, I don't know, the wonder and the horror
are very close to each other. Yeah.
They might even be the same thing depending on what the context is, you know?
Yeah, totally.
You know, the water that's maybe you've been in the desert for too many days and like it is the most wonderful thing you've ever seen.
Yeah.
Well, if you're a drowning man, like you don't want to see that water, you know?
Yeah.
So
So I think the horror has to do with what is you lose the Vervaeke, I think, used the example in The Shining, right? Where it's like, you know, things are strange and weird, but like then all of a sudden the door just opens and no one's there.
Right.
You are now in that moment.
That's a great point.
You are in a different world.
Yes.
And you can feel the sense of sanity lose its grip.
Right.
Right. All bets are off from here.
Yes.
Everything that you've ever known.
Yes.
Right. That is
You're
horror.
Like, yes. Yeah. All of a sudden the laws of physics aren't the same.
Yes.
Yeah. And then that is horrifying.
Yeah.
Because you're whatever you've developed, all your experience up until this point that you can use to interpret this data.
Yeah.
It's now irrelevant.
Yeah, totally. Yes.
Irrelevant. That's an interesting word.
Yes.
For Vervaeke too.
Yeah. And it's so interesting because it's like, I mean, having encountered horror before, right? Like, I think horror was one of the things that happened when I was a kid, right? Like lots of those things.
Yeah.
Kind of like if you go into it, it kind of ends up circling back around, right? Like it ends up like the beautiful is around the corner from it in some way. There's some deep, and through that, I think I've developed some kind of sense of trust, right? In being as such through going through those kinds of experiences.
Yeah.
Right. Like there's a sense, there's a through line through those, right?
Yeah.
Where wonder, I would imagine one of the things that distinguishes this is really fun talking about this, is I think rather than the loss of sanity,
deepening of sanity.
A different kind of, it transforms your sense of sense.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
In a deeper way.
Yeah. I wonder if this is related to reason and rationality somehow too, because always, this was a book recommend is DC Schindler's book, Plato's Critique of Impure Reason.
Yeah.
You know, he talks about that ecstatic dimension of human reason or rationality, that it always exists to undermine itself in a way that, you know, you're establishing these categories, but there's the deeper knowledge that these categories are just provisional. And you're trying to reach reach deeper in toward wonder or into reality. And then it disrupts all of that. And you have to categorize. And that process is never complete, basically.
That's the ride we go on in reading.
Yes.
Right.
And the process of insight too, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
One of my highest health priorities is keeping my brain in top shape. To take care of my brain power, I do many things, such as striving to read, write, exercise, and meditate daily. One of the latest tools in my brain power toolkit is MindLab Pro. MindLab Pro is a nootropic supplement that is scientifically proven to enhance your brain power. When I take MindLab Pro, my mind feels like it has a better grip on the world, my thinking is more lucid, and the articulation of my speech is radically improved. MindLab Pro has been tested in rigorous, double-blind, placebo-controlled human trials and has been proven to enhance brain power for users in every age group. MindLab Pro is an advanced formulation of 11 nootropic ingredients and is backed by research from over 1,400 human trials conducted over the past 32 years. So if you're looking to enhance your brain power, MindLab Pro is an excellent solution. Go to mindlabpro.com/breedlove to start enhancing your brain power today. Again, that's mindlabpro.com/breedlove. If you're listening to this podcast, you probably get it. You get that Bitcoin upends everything that state-sponsored schools teach us about money. For those who get the importance of Bitcoin, it is important that we have a smart way to buy and hold Bitcoin. My friends at Coinbits, the oldest Bitcoin-only exchange in the United States, have pioneered the concept of roundups, which converts your spare change into Bitcoin. Simply connect your credit or debit cards, and your usual purchases are rounded up to the nearest dollar, letting you stack sats on every purchase without even thinking about it. Coinbits also provides a terrific self-custody experience. Connect a hardware wallet for automatic withdrawals into cold storage to minimize your risk and stay sovereign over your Bitcoin. My favorite Coinbits feature is Coinbits Plus, which gives you the best exchange rate on Bitcoin. It even gives you real-time feedback on how well you are doing on your savings plan. With Coinbits Plus, power users can save more money to buy even more Bitcoin. All that, plus peer-to-peer cash and Bitcoin payments, target orders, price alerts, and more means Coinbits can help you do almost anything you need to do with Bitcoin. So go to coinbits.app/breedlove to sign up today. Again, that is Coinbits, BITS.app/breedlove. Circling. I've never done this, so correct me wherever I am wrong. But it's a form of relational meditation where people are focused on what is happening between them in the present moment. What is this practice, and is this, how is it part of your story?
Yeah, totally. So, well, a couple of things. So as we talk about circling, because I always forget this part, and my business partners are like, you should never forget this part. So it's just basically like, if we're talking about circling, if you want to learn circling or dive deeper into it, we actually figured out how to teach it. That was a whole ride to figure out how to do that. But like, we actually figured out how to do that. We have self-study programs that you can get immediately. We also, my company, the Circling Institute, we have like open events, open to everybody. We have intensive weekends. We also have a year-long training for people who want to learn how to facilitate, right? So all will be in the show notes, I'm sure.
Yes.
Yeah, to check that out. So if anything speaks to you, want to check it out, just go to those links.
Put it all in the show notes. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. So circling.
Yes.
So one of the things that you talked about was this paying attention to what's in the present moment, right? So first of all, one of the things that we've kind of made it a practice of doing here in the last number of years, right? Which is out of, I think, shorthand and habit, is that we used to refer to circling as a practice. And although, it was that's fine at some level, but I've been realizing that there's something about talking about circling as a practice that binds it too much to the form, right? And the form of circling, I would say, or circling sessions, right, is if you get too focused on that, for one, it gets in the way of actually learning the circling method, and it kind of misses the point, right? You could say that I would say circling, as it's evolved and shown itself to me and to many other people, really, I would say is technically we could say it's like a system of communication, right? I would say more poetically, it's a way of communion. It's a way or an approach to relationship as such.
Okay.
Right. And it's interesting because the thing about relationship, I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think relationship is a skill. I think there are skills to relating, but it seems to me relationship is a capacity, right? And an innate one, right?
Can you maybe linger on that a bit? What is the difference between a skill and a capacity?
Yeah. Well, you remember the pickup movement? You remember that with there's this whole kind of underground movement that got popular. Somebody wrote the book, The Game.
Of course. Yeah. I've listened to the audiobook.
Totally.
Yeah.
These guys would get together, right? And they'd memorize these lines and they'd learn how to say certain things at certain times and stuff like that. And obviously, like when you would watch it, you're like, it's totally weird.
Yeah.
Right. They learned the skill to say that thing at that time and that timing, but it was not relating. Right.
Right.
So there's this way that you could have the skills, perform the skills, yet not be relational.
Okay.
Right. Being relational is something much deeper.
Yeah.
And I think a way to kind of see that is that in some level, I mean, you have kids, right? Like, so you watched a little being become a person, right? When they come out, they're not exactly a person. They're like like there's a tonos to them, right? There's a hum that somehow never leaves and expresses itself, but they're kind of they're a human being. But the process of growing up and parenting them is this process of them becoming a person. How does a human being become a person, right? That's not just given, right? They come in, we become people in and through other people, in and through like inner subjectivity, right? I think the more I think about it, the more I'm blown away by this, because it's like, it's hard to overstate how like people are people by virtue of the sum total of relationships in their life.
Yes.
Right.
Right.
Like even the notion of sovereignty, right, sovereignty is a mode of relation, right? And I think I say these kinds of things because I think we're still recovering. We still have this kind of hangover from the Cartesian, Kantian Enlightenment way of thinking about ourselves as like things.
Yeah.
You know, a subject over against an object.
Right.
And that it's really hard to understand to what degree like we are actually arise out of the between each other.
Of course.
Right?
We are transjective. Yeah.
So the capacity to relate is, I think, synonymous with the capacity to be a person, right? In that sense. And so in so many ways, and we talk about this in the Circling Institute, to learn how to facilitate circling and become masterful at it, you don't get the sense that people learn, although they learn a bunch of skills, right? And they fine tune a bunch of skills. That's not what has them become master circlers, right? It's they develop into one, right? Because when you start talking about deepening a human capacity, right, you're not at the level of content, you're at a deeper level of context, right? And so oftentimes people talk about the process of learning how to circle. Is it kind of an intense developmental process, right, through time? And I think that makes sense of like the more relational we are, the more human we are, right? In a deep way. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that lands for me, I guess in a lot of frameworks that I've come to understand personhood.
Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned subject object, right? That we're not just this inert receiver of objective data.
Yeah.
That then records it on the blank slate and then uses that to interpret new data.
Right.
Like, although we did talk, there is some of that there, but it's more, it's less binary than that, right?
Yeah.
There's a much more of a continuity of our experience with others.
Yeah.
Which then leads me into, Rene Girard's mimetic desire thing, that we are internalizing models of other people, much more so as children and adolescents, right? That we internalize our parents largely. That's why we inherit a lot of these unconscious patterns from them. And it is that amalgamation of these different persons we have modeled internally that then becomes our own custom personality, basically.
Totally. Yeah.
And that process never stops, right? Like we're doing
that's a very important point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, we ossify to some extent as we age, maybe not inevitably, but prototypically, you know, can't teach an old dog new tricks. People get stuck in their ways. Like we say all these things, but I don't think the process ever actually ends, right? That we are everything, your perception, your memory, your experience is constantly imprinting on that personality that you've accumulated over time.
Absolutely.
And it doesn't have to be this is why I think the knowledge of like mimetic theory and these other things is so interesting, because it doesn't have to be unconscious necessarily.
Yeah.
Right? You mentioned the word sovereignty.
Yeah.
Which, I don't know, you could tell me if you agree or not with this definition. I've loosely defined in the past as something like the authority to act as you see fit.
Yeah.
Of course, the operative word there in terms of what we're talking about is the you.
Yeah.
It's like, well, who's really deciding?
Yeah.
And, I think if you make something like the process of mimesis conscious, then you can be you, the amalgamation of all these personalities you've interacted with. You can become a conscious programmer of that process.
Yeah. Really quick, tell me how you're using the word mimesis.
Mimetic. So where we get the word imitation, mimic.
Yes.
It's synonymous with mimetic desire, basically. But this the fancy ancient Greek word for it.
Yeah.
But then if you make that unconscious process conscious, which again, Carl Jung, love this quote. Yeah. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will continue to direct your life, and you'll call it fate. But if you make that process conscious, then you can choose who you're interacting with. Right? You can be very selective about who your mimetic models are, the content you're consuming, the books you're reading. Right? It's not just direct in meat space interpersonal interaction. It's also video, books, etc.
Yeah.
People don't have to be alive, right?
Yeah.
You can imitate mythological figures, right? We can engage with Socrates. We can engage with Buddha. We can engage with Christ. Yeah. Obviously not in this space, but in enough of a space to imitate and learn from them.
Yeah.
And so that's where sovereignty is. It's not sovereignty is like, I'm this independent thing that nothing affects and I can affect everything else.
Yeah.
It's more like I'm aware of how all of this process unfolds.
Yeah.
And therefore I am selective about the people and places and content that I insert myself between.
Yeah.
And in doing so become more self-making.
Yeah.
Right. Which is the defining feature of life itself.
Yeah, totally.
So,
sovereignty. It's interesting because we talk about the first stage or facet of circling, which this took a long time to be. I have to say, I have such respect for, I think I've earned having so much respect and felt so humbled by it. The process of taking something kind of implicit, embodied, and making it explicit, right? That is hard. Because when we first started circling, it's like just something that kind of emerged. It wasn't something we never, no one ever said like, hey, let's do a thing. Let's make it about relating. And it wasn't like that at all. A bunch of us had these experiences that more thing happened, this surplus thing happened. And basically what happened, especially Jerry and I in particular, right? A bunch of us did, but like Jerry and I in particular went, that we didn't have a word for it, whatever that surplus of what was happening in these relational experiences that we're having that weren't planned, that just unfolded. We were like, that's like deep and profound in a way that's different than all the other deep and profound things that we were into at the time, which, being in the Bay Area, there's all kinds of, immersed in that. And so him and I just really, it caught us, right? The way that you were talking about, it caught our interest, right? And brought us in. And in some sense, I still feel like the process of circling and the circling method for me, I still feel this way. I feel like the process of circling for me circling is the process of learning about what circling is, right? In so many ways, it's got this element to it, this inexhaustibility. I think that's why I'm still talking about it, right? Because it always seems to reach the edge of my intelligibility, but in this way that edge calls me, inspires me in some way, right?
I want to ask you, I don't know, the circle.
Yeah.
Why the circle metaphor?
Yeah.
And what immediately, the image that was coming to me was pi, basically, right? Like, it's impossible to square the circle. So you get this infinite decimal behind pi.
Yeah.
It's roughly 22/7.
Yeah.
And if you consider that kind of the squaring is almost like the categories we're trying to use to encapsulate the circle, but the circle is not, well, it's not square at all, right? So you can just pixelate it further and further and further, but you can never capture it.
Yeah.
Why is, I don't know if that relates or not, but this is what came to me. Why the circle? Why is circling is the metaphor?
So this is what's interesting. On one level, it's totally random. The name, like, it's totally random. It was this guy, Jerry. So, I mean, Jerry's kind of, you could say, the kind of the co-founder, and he's, you know, they used to call us back in the day, this is in like the late 90s, they used to refer to us as Jerry and Guy as the Beavis and Butthead of transformation. Like, two basically, like,
which one were you?
Traumatized children, right? Like walking around, right? You know, in some sense, we were both dorks, you know, in like a fundamental way, right? And so much of circling, right, ran through our dorkhood, right, in a way. So like, just even, so Jerry was this really, really intense, loving guy who strangely I would say he had probably the most need for approval of any human being I've ever met, yet at the very same time had this urge to like poke at the thing that would have him lose that approval, right? He was like you'd see some kind of like place you were messed up and he'd just kind of tickle it, right? And in some sense it was all connected to his heart, but you know, he's such a paradox in so many ways. But essentially, like, he was doing his thing with a friend of his, and this friend of his like went, maybe you're doing that circling thing with me. And it stuck. Now I've thought about, like, well, why did that word stuck? Why was it that, right? I think that's where we can kind of draw out what we're talking about. Because you could have said peanut butter, right? You could have said squaring. But he said circling. And why did that stick, right? And I think about the sense of, you know, and this has to do with kind of that quality of relata and bearing, right? There's that sense of circumambulation, right? And I think about circumambulation as, and this is very much kind of what relationship is kind of like. You know, at first, you don't realize you're circling around something. You don't realize that you're going in circles. But after a few rounds of it, all of a sudden, you realize, having been totally involved in it in some way, you look to the right and you realize you've been climbing some mountain, right? And you recognize that in the moment, that then somehow grants hermeneutically all the circles that you went through before. So it's got this immersive, non-cognitive, yet, you know, insightful sense of things, right? And there are things that cannot be addressed straight on, right? There are just those things that you can only know through undergoing, right? And circling around, right? In that way. And I think very much that totally fits, right? That totally fits, right?
Yeah.
In that way of circling around somebody, because if we think about, you know, you and I, we are before each other. This each other, like, you and I could sit here for 1,000 years and say everything. And for 1,000 years, say everything that we know, everything that we think, right? Back and forth for 1,000 years, and we still won't reach the bottom of each other. Right? There's nothing I could say, and there's nothing you could say about you that can reduce you down and sum you up.
That's
right?
Right. Yeah.
You are a legitimate other, right? In that sense. And so there's this way with relationships where people are sources of inexhaustibility, right?
Aspects of irreducible complexity.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so this kind of this sense of circling around or spiraling around, right? Something, dwelling together, dwelling in something, right? You can kind of see the movement I'm doing with my hands there, right? I would say that's why, I think that's why it stuck.
That makes sense. And then there's, you were saying up the mountain.
Yeah.
So you're not just staying at the same altitude. We'll use that metaphor, right? You're not just circling, actually almost spiraling up.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So you're navigating another dimension, right? You're not just going straight up, right? You're actually circling up.
Yeah.
And somehow that's necessary.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and I don't know exactly why. Like, you would think of if people are they have these different dimensions, right? You know, obviously this is all metaphorical, but like, you know, the length and the width of a person and then the depth of a person.
Yes.
Why not just go straight up, you know, into the depth or straight down, whatever metaphor you're looking for here.
Right.
Something about that spiraling is necessary.
Yeah.
And what is that? What is that? What is like seeing the same person in different situations, in different contexts. Yeah. And then you're assembling that model we were talking about.
Yeah.
And that model can't be purely propositional. Obviously, if I sit here and just tell you, which first of all, I could just completely blow smoke up your ass, right? I could tell you that I'm a vegan, and I could tell you that, you know, whatever things that I'm not actually into. And then you would just have this model of me that's untrue.
Right.
And so the propositions aren't sufficient, even if they were comprehensive in some way, even if it was possible to tell you the totality of everything that I could be in words. Yeah. Well, there's always that risk of deception. So that's not going to work. You need to see people in different social settings, ritual settings, et cetera, et cetera.
As I like to say, you will always outlive my conception of you.
Right.
Right. And it's also true that I will always have a conception of you to outlive.
Yes.
Right. But you are that being for which what makes you a legitimate other, right, is you are that which I can never consume in my own subject. Right. Right. You recede. Right.
Yes.
But something about it's paradoxical, because that sense of receding is somehow connected with being close to one another. Right. It's this. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Maybe this is something here. The map and the territory metaphor again, right? Yeah. You're mapping the person.
Yeah.
But as you map, you get a finer detail of the map. Yeah. Well, then you start to see where the map is not the territory at a more fine-grained level.
Yes.
And maybe that's the receding then.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, oh, these are the things that I can never.
Yeah.
I've been married to this woman for 50 years.
Totally.
There's some famous saying. It's like, what? I'll butcher it now, but he's like, what I love most about my wife is all of the things that I'll never know about her. Something, I'm probably messing it up, but it was a guy that had been married for a long time, and like, because this is related to reciprocal opening, I think, right? That there is always that love being reciprocal opening, right? You get to know someone more deeply, then you unlock a new level of trust, that they get to know you more deeply. And that is the process by which we grow into love. But that presupposes there's always the withdrawing mystery of the person, right? No matter how deep you get, well, there's it's inexhaustible, as you said.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how does this tie back to circling? Then are we just are we exploring that process of reciprocal opening between people?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So here's one of the things about, if we kind of back up just a little bit and look at the bigger context that circling came out of. Because one of the big things that was really fascinating to me, and I didn't completely understand, right? And I tried to understand it through the wrong pathway for years until I got it, and I was like, oh, that was obvious, right? Was the context of what circling came out of. I didn't understand what that was, because the question I was asking myself is basically in 10 years, it was on every continent, essentially. And I'm like people try to do that, right? Like put lots of money in doing that, and it never like reaches past their town or something like, but this went, I'm like, what the hell is going on with that? In fact, I would say it did that directly in spite of the various personalities involved, including myself, right? Like, and at first I tried to understand that by the methods of circling. Mm-hmm. Is it something about what we're approaching things? But then it dawned on me as time went on, right? As the internet became more and more prominent, I started to recognize, this is part of a broader sweep that actually reveals the face of the time that we're in ways that I didn't understand at the time. And we talked a little bit about this at dinner last night, but as we all kind of know, right? If you've read Marshall McLuhan, mm-hmm. right? Like, and people, Walter Ong and people like that our communication technologies, when they transform, we transform.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're going through it right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
And written language. Like, if you've ever written, have you read Walter Ong?
No.
Oh man, you would love Walter Ong, man. Okay. Where he tries to have you get into the world of a totally oral culture.
Okay.
Right? Where written language is not there. It's just like not even part of it. Yeah. And then ask yourself, what is a word to them? Mm-hmm. And it's really hard to do, but when you crawl into that, you're like, whoa, it's radically different. Right.
Yeah.
So like the written language transformed us, right? Of
course. Yeah.
It was written language was the first time that you could say knowledge that happened verbally, mm-hmm. Moved out of, became decontextualized.
Yes.
Right.
Right.
Huge deal. Right.
Yes.
Then, we have the printing press, mm-hmm. another huge deal. Yeah. Like that broke up the church, right? Yeah. All these kinds of things, right? Radio, television. But for the most part, you had this, you had the communication that was like one way, mm-hmm. right? Like TV and radio and books and stuff like that. The two-way, right? The information exchange, the back and forth was always tied to relationship, mm-hmm. right? So communication was always coupled with communion, right? All the way up until the answering machine. I would say it was the first intimation of this, right? Mm-hmm. Where before the answering machine, you at least had to talk on the phone, mm-hmm. right? Communication and relationship were like this. Mm-hmm. Then the answering machine happens. And then I remember my first memories of like, I really don't want to talk to this person, but I want to get this information. So mm-hmm. I'd call them when they weren't home. Mm-hmm. I remember doing that and like having these mm-hmm. exchanges just on the answering machine to avoid the terrifyingness of contact, which has always been terrifying at some level, right? And then we have the internet, and then email, and then texting, and then social media, and like you and I right now have selves mm-hmm. out talking to other people in some way, that we may or may not find out about later. Mm-hmm. I don't even know what to make of that, right?
Yeah.
So this uncoupling I don't hear a lot of people talk about this, but this last uncoupling between communication from relation, mm-hmm. that being uncoupled, I think is essentially what circling anticipated and was in response to, right? Like, and I did some research like not that long ago. I'm like looking at writing a book on circling, but I was able to estimate that 100 years ago, the average person, just in living their life demanded, I think it was between 25 to 35 conversations a day, mm-hmm. right? So mm-hmm. just to function, right? Life required that you interact with, have those conversations. Now it's down to 5. Mm-hmm. And I would suspect oftentimes lower, mm-hmm. right? Now, when you consider that and you think about what we were talking about earlier, human beings we basically reduce the necessity of those very things for which human beings become people, right?
Wow.
So just kind of, sit with that for just a second. Like,
yeah, okay. Because the opportunity for modeling one another occurs in conversation. Mm-hmm. But when we reduce our 35 a day down to 5, we've reduced, whatever that is, 85% of our opportunities for modeling one another.
Totally.
And what does that do to us? But I mean, the flip side to it, and the reason there is so much migration to asynchronous communication, like you're describing, is because there's a lot of economic efficiency.
Yeah.
Right, like the reason you're calling that guy on the answering machine is because you don't want to get sucked in probably to a 15-minute conversation in addition to whatever you're not comfortable with the conversation or whatever, but you really just want to get this one piece of data across.
Yeah.
That was sort of like a pseudo text message, right? You're like, now like, oh, meet me there at 8.
Yeah.
I don't want to call you and talk to you for 10 minutes to tell you to meet me there at 8.
Right.
And so there is an efficiency gain.
Totally.
But what is the price?
What is the price?
What price?
Yeah. And what is what is that transforming us into? Right. When you remove, like literally, like we are, it's interesting. When you think about it, it's such a strange thing. I'm like, what is this thing that's going on? Where like literally, if you have an internet connection, and maybe a room with electricity, you could start a company, right? You could, in fact, have a whole list of contacts. You could theoretically order in all your food, right? Become actually really famous with literally never having to relate to somebody. That's actually possible. That's just, I don't know what to say about that. There's something deeply strange, right, about this movement, right?
Indeed.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not sure. You would tend to want to say it's inherently bad, almost like when the television comes out and people say, oh, it's the devil's box. You can't look at that. But it's like, well, it actually is just a new information distribution technology.
Yeah.
There's trade-offs, basically.
Yeah, there's definitely trade-offs.
And so I guess, are you then saying that circling arose as like a way to address the trade-offs of the asynchronous communication?
Yeah, I think it intuited it and it anticipated it before we actually even had language to understand it. That's what's really interesting to me about it, right? I think people who are drawn towards it were drawn towards it for that reason without them knowing that reason, right? So interesting how that happens. That's what I really mean. It's like circling really was something that emerged, right? In that way. And I'm appreciating that. And I have a feeling I'm going to continually appreciate that more and more and more. Like kind of like just how much you're more and more appreciating this mystery about money, right? Like there's something, there's something like that there.
Yeah.
To make another analogy to it, another example of something like that is if you look at our relationship to our bodies before and after the Industrial Revolution, right? Like before the Industrial Revolution, I think what the Industrial Revolution basically did, machines basically brought the world to a small circle in front of us.
Yeah.
Right? Like you could say they uncollapsed something like outcomes from movement, right? Like it took over a lot of the movement, right? For an outcome to happen. Before then, if you had to, take a shit, you had to dig a hole, right? You had to, if you had to eat, you had to shoot the lion, right? Like there was just all this movement and work and necessity. Life itself demanded so many things.
Yeah.
And really the word physical fitness as a distinction, maybe it was there when it was involved with some kind of sport, but like as a domain that one takes up, like
wasn't there.
You didn't need it, right?
Yeah.
So after Industrial Revolution, that thing happens. And then all of a sudden we didn't have to move.
Yeah.
And guess what happens? Everyone gets diabetes and they get fat and and then out of this, it transforms our relationship to our bodies, and this notion of physical fitness happens, right? Which leads
which we do on machines, ironically enough.
Yes, totally. Which leads to this very strange thing where we do things like we take a room and then we concentrate that room, we concentrate gravity, then we pay money to go into that room to move for a period of time, right? To
play with gravity,
to account for this domain that is now mine called physical fitness, right? That's an example of that, right?
Yeah.
Of like technology and how it changes things, right? In a certain sense. When you think about a gym that way, it's so strange.
It's super cool though, because there's also it's like in an economy where different market actors start to specialize.
Yes.
But it's kind of occurred in your own life, right?
Yes.
Like I only need to go to this concentrated place of concentrated gravity, let's say, which this is sort of a metaphor, but the weights are heavy, and so you can do a few reps and get maybe the physical results that would take you 8 hours of farming, something like that. You can get it done in an hour, basically. So you can economize the physical training aspect of your life.
Yeah.
And then that frees you up to then go and amplify your labor on these other industrial devices towards other ends, whether you're driving the tractor or, running the steam engine or whatever the thing is.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it really does, to your earlier point, it's not just the information technology that changes us. It's technology, broadly speaking, right? It changes our lifestyle, our rituals, our regimens, our language, which we touched on earlier. That's really interesting. And I don't know why this came up for me, but like, the way you're describing conversation as being this opportunity for us to model the other and then simultaneously construct our personality. Just as that relates to human action, that, the purposeful use of means to pursue ends.
Yeah.
We were all being a means to one another of constructing our own personality.
Yes.
But then that window of opportunity got smaller.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So then we have to find other means.
Yeah.
And I guess that's what we're doing on social media to some extent.
Yeah. This is where it kind of gets,
but it's not the same.
Yeah. They're not, it's not, I would say it's actually not that.
Yeah.
Right. I would say social media, because, okay, how do we approach this? There's so many things. This is where I have a tendency to talk so fast because there's so many things, right? So I just want to kind of like slow down for a second. So first of all, just to complete that loop around circling, in some way, I don't think, like, say in the 1920s, circling could have been, right?
Everyone's doing it now.
Everyone's already like, why do I want to like sit and focus on relationship? I'm fucking to have too much relationship. I fucking people leave me alone and it just wouldn't have made sense. But it started to make sense in the new ethos, right, of technology, basically. Now, here's the thing, because I think a lot of people would say, well, yeah, wouldn't you say we have more communication than we ever have, right? Like, people are on the phone all the time. They're texting, they're email, like, right? It's not synchronistic, right? It's asynchronistic, right? That is a big difference, right? Having that, not this, because you can imagine it's like, it wouldn't have been as good if we were on Zoom.
For sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Like us being in person, right? That extra dimension discloses so much of ourselves, right? So much and a space between ourselves, right? That I think both of us will say, like, yeah, we're thinking thoughts that I had never quite thought before about that, right? Yeah. There's a way that I'm indwelling in you and you're co-indwelling in me, and I'll walk away from this and you'll in some way be somehow part of my mind and what I'm thinking about, and all of that, right?
And you can get that on Zoom, but like in a much diminished way.
Yeah. I think actually Zoom is interesting. Zoom is, I think it works for circling because you can have the logos, right? And you could see the visual stuff, right? So it's able to hook in surprisingly well. And unfortunately, very good, because I so wish that it wasn't on Zoom anymore. COVID made, all the stuff that we did get on Zoom. But anyways, that's another thing. So in some way one of the way that you could look at circling is something like a gym, right? You could see the circling method. And when we do circling sessions, are ways similar to the way that you talked about yoga, right? Like you talked about, there's something about I'm stretching and I'm doing these asanas, right? And the asanas are multidimensional. They're not just exercises, right? They're the warrior pose. There's a philosophy. There's a thing that you kind of dwell in, right? And you do these extreme things, right? And exercise that in that class that then generalize. So when you're not thinking about yoga, when you are sitting at the desk, you're naturally related to gravity in a more open way, right? I would say there is that element to circling and the things that when people practice the circling method, that you could say, if you say something like, take all the profound experiences with other people that you've ever had, like life altering conversations, right? Moments of deep intimacy, relationships with people that have been transformative. And if you were to just basically find the through line, right, that connected all of them, took that through line, and then transformed them into asanas, right? Asanas of like listening, asanas of tension, asanas of being in your body, asanas of speech, of sharing, right? And if we did a circling session, we basically are assuming those asanas with each other and seeing how deeply we can stretch, right?
I see.
Not so, and this is the part where I wanted to get away from calling it a practice, because it's not so that you can just get better and better at circling sessions. That kind of misses the point. It's so that when you're talking to your mother and your mother says that irritating thing to you, you find possibilities that you didn't see before that you can then respond in some way that's more loving or more revealing, right? In a way that you couldn't before, right? That generalized thing that you talked about with the flexibility of yoga. I would say that circling has a kind of function like that I've seen over and over and over again, which is really powerful.
I see.
Yeah.
I see. It's really cool. Sounds like it's almost like practicing being human.
Yeah.
So there's a very special place called the farm at Okefenokee. It's a 1,000-acre regenerative farm community about 45 minutes northwest of Jacksonville, Florida. The farm is a completely off-grid community. It has total food, water, and energy independence. Everything on the farm is 100% organic, and it even features wild boar and bear hunting. The farm at Okefenokee is right next to the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge, where you can do camping and canoeing tours. So if you're like me and you're interested in the self-sovereign lifestyle, then you can get your own lot on the farm at Okefenokee if you tell them that I sent you. Once you get a lot, you can build one of 3 custom cabin options. So if you value freedom, self-sovereignty, and living in touch with nature, then join me and my family. We have lot number 21, and we're going to be building a cabin there starting December 2025. To learn more about the farm at Okefenokee, go to okefarm.com and make sure to tell them that I sent you.
Yo, if you're a Bitcoiner, you need the Orange Pill app. It's where you connect locally and globally with other sovereign individuals. I use it when I travel to meet Bitcoiners and find meetups. It can also help you find merchants that accept sats. No distractions, no noise, just real Bitcoiners. Download the Orange Pill app today and find your local Bitcoin tribe.
So I heard this distinction made, I don't know where at this point, a distinction between practice and ritual.
Yeah.
That practice is something done alone, rituals done something in social settings. Yeah. Is circling something you can do on your own? It wouldn't seem like it. So if that distinction is accurate, which is, I'm not sure if it is or not, but would circling be more of a ritual than a practice in that sense?
That's a great question. Yeah, like if we think about ritual as like an enacted symbol, right? So you're enacting a pattern, right? Yeah. That's innate.
And with others.
Yeah, right? And with others. Yeah, I think there is a ritual element to it, right? When for me there is, right? And really important ones. And there's that sense that Mircea Eliade, who spent his whole life perplexed by rituals, right? Because he's like, what is this thing people keep doing that all cultures did throughout time. And they didn't know about each other, but they still did this thing. What the hell is that? And what he would say is a ritual is a kind of enacted transformative container that in his world reaches in to the unfathomable and the chaotic. And then the rites and the ceremonies and the repetitions draw that chaos. And the ritual is a kind of transformative container that transforms that chaos into cosmos, right? That's a ritual. Yeah, I would say I think a lot of people would say in the practice, like in a circling session, a lot of times that's exactly what happens. Yeah, in a big way. Yeah.
Transforming the chaos into cosmos. That's fascinating. Yeah, I mean, we get into the domain of ritual. I love it. Ritual as an enacted symbol, I think is fascinating.
Yeah.
They are these patterns of human action or interaction that are productive towards some end.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I think even something as fundamental as conversational spoken language is a ritual of kind.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Like we need to establish there's a protocol beneath it, right? It's not just the words and the definitions. There's the grammar.
Yeah.
You know, Vervaeke often uses the term grammar well outside of linguistics, right? That there's a certain rhythm.
Yeah.
You know, when I pause, when I use a certain inflection or intonation, you know that there's other layers of meaning besides just the words that I'm using. And so in ritual, man, it is maybe one of the most important or most fundamental technologies of them all.
Yeah.
Like anything we're going to do cooperatively, whether it's have a conversation, build a business, run a country. Yeah. Like there have to be these ritualistic elements in place.
Yeah.
Obviously religion is one of these, probably the original social institution that gave birth to all of this ritualized behavior.
Yeah.
And so it's almost as if all of our social constructs or social institutions, to try and put an umbrella over things as disparate as religion and the legal system.
Yes. Yes.
You know, or even armies.
Yeah.
Like they all need the ingredient of ritual to work. Yeah. Basically.
Totally.
And that's fascinating to me because then I think, you know, that gets into economics very quickly for me too. It's like capitalism is this giant ritual. Private property is this ritual, right? We're just pretending. We're live action role playing.
Yeah.
You own the things that you produced. I own the things that I produce, and we can trade via contract.
Right.
And it's these social technologies, if you'll allow me that sort of description, they become so fundamental, they become invisible to us.
Yeah.
Right. We just take it to be normal that you can open a bank account or that you can go into a restaurant and sit among strangers, right? Or that you can go to a theater and everyone's facing one direction. Like all of these natural, which are completely unnatural, by the way. Like you don't see any animals going to sit in a theater.
Yes.
You know, first of all, they can't build the theater because they don't have the ritual. Second of all, they can't all sit in one direction and have this level of trust that they're not going to eat each other or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
It's this thing that becomes invisible to us.
Yeah.
But it's so primary to what being human and being a person is.
Yes.
And so I wonder if circling, I don't know if there's a connection there. Like,
and I would say to the degree that, you know, like a circling session, the way it organizes, right, in different forms, I think does have a ritual quality to it, like a ceremonial quality to it, right? Yet I would say that's actually, I think that's drawing from a reality that we weren't even that conscious of, right? Like that we were just it's almost like that. There's a physics involved in there, right? That like, oh, of course it would become ritualistic, right? In that way, because there's a certain sacredness, right? Yeah, that these different, you know, for example, when we start. Maybe a circling session oftentimes we'll start by just like taking a deep breath and like meditating for a minute or two, right? And then maybe turn towards the person if we're circling like one person intentionally, like just being with that person in silence for a minute or two. And then attempting to bring words to our own experience being with them,
I see.
Right? As a beginning. And you can hear in that we're mindful of something like the sacred, right? Like we're mindful that what could open up here could go beyond anything that we anticipate, which is actually always the case in any conversation, right? If it's a real conversation, that's what makes conversations interesting, is because we have no idea where it's going to end up. There's no way to know, right? Like I don't even know what I'm going to say.
Yeah.
That's also why we avoid conversations. That's also why we text, right?
Yeah.
And I would say back to the technology thing is that I would say in so many ways, like all technology removes friction, right? At least the technological techne in its modern form seeks to collapse distances and removes friction, right? To optimize and to draw and extract out resources, right? That and then dispose of the rest, right?
Yeah.
This kind of collapsing of distances and removing, friction in some way, like that is essentially in social media. I do not think we encounter others as others.
Yeah. Right. They're avatars at best. Yeah.
And it's weird. They're like, even if they're against us, they're the same thing, just the opposite. We're actually encountering the same. We're not encountering otherness as such, right?
Yeah, man, it's so interesting because there's so many people. Like a complaint that I've had, I mean, I guess I've verbalized it too, but it's sort of like this internal frustration. Certain women I've dated in the past, certain people I've just known either through business or through friends. And I guess because I'm an old millennial, like I'm old enough to remember the world before social media.
Yeah.
This tends to be people that are a little bit younger.
Yeah.
They take social media to be the primary reality. Yeah. Like almost as if it is their, they trust the evidence of social media more than they trust the evidence of their own eyes and ears in the present.
Yeah.
And if they're not getting the validation or whatever they get there, that like it actually, their personhood shrivels. And I'm like, what is going on here?
Notice the difference in the location of what is most real for them.
Yes.
It dislocates the real.
Right.
That is intense.
That's crazy.
What do you think about that? Right.
And I guess circling would be an antidote to that, perhaps.
I think it is. Yeah.
Because I've long thought, like, what is the fix for this?
Yeah.
There is no.
Yeah.
I didn't think there was a fix.
I think it's one of the antidotes.
Yeah.
In that, it's like it really concentrates around the most difficult part of relationship, which is the genuine I-thou encounter.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's maybe useful just to kind of talk a little bit about Buber, right? Because he's been super influential on my thinking. Him and Heidegger and all those guys. So Buber says, first of all, he says, Buber's interesting because he's kind of a mystic, but not really. He's kind of a religious theologian, but not really. He's kind of a poet, but not totally. He's intercategorical in this sense, right? Which is appropriate for what he's talking about. But his most famous book, I and Thou, what he says, okay, the world is a relationship, right? Especially for us, right? The world is a relation. And he says, as human beings, we are in one of two modes of relation, right? We are either in an I-it relation or an I-thou relation.
Yes.
And the way he distinguishes that is he says, when we are in an I-it relation, we are relating with the cup, with the person, with the light as a means to my own end.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm appropriating myself to this, not for its own sake, but for an end. Right. And he says, that's the world of time and space, right? That's the world that we live in almost all the time. Right. And then he says, much rare is an I-thou relation, right? And he says, when you relate to the world, to you, to the cup, to a flower, a sunset, when it's a thou, I am relating to that as an end in itself, right? And I'm relating to it as intrinsically valuable and of worth, right? Essentially otherness. right? Like when I relate to you as an it, you basically you are my conception of you, right?
Right. You've reduced me to your model of me.
Yes, totally.
Yeah.
And this is those moments when you outlive my conception are moments of thou.
Yes.
Right. That's when that comes through. And this is what's really, I love about Buber. This is really what's fascinating. And he says, I, thou, and I, it are spoken as one word. Right. What he means by that is they're word pairs, right? And he's making a kind of an ontological statement here, right? He's basically saying, in other words, there are no it's out there and thou's out there and I's out there that then find each other. No, an I, it is a total mode, right? Like like the I am an I, it relationship. It's a self world. I, it, right? I, thou, right? Here's that in between part, right? This relational ontology, it kind of really coming through here. He emphasizes that. And what he says is like, he then says this other really interesting thing where he says, and the I of it is not the same I as the I of thou, right? And you can kind of think about this on a practical level, like, say, you're in a kind of, your wife is coming up to you and you're busy and like she wants something and she's kind of irritated. You're irritated and she's like, in that moment, she's an it, right? Like you're getting away. You're the obstacle to the means to my end. Like, so let me answer this question just to get you. But then in a sense, like all of a sudden you recognize she feels hurt. And in that moment, right, you're like, oh, I forgot you're a person.
Yeah.
And in that moment, you can feel
a
different I arises.
Yes.
As she becomes thou, a corollary different I arises. Right. That is not the same I.
Because the relationship is fundamental.
Yeah, totally.
Not the relata. The relata comes from the relation.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that having and being mode as well?
I think there's a good correlation to that. Definitely. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Because Vervaeke talks about like having, the possession of the it.
Yes.
Control over the it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then being, with the thou is like you're acknowledging and respecting that that mystery, right? That you can never fully have a person or control a person.
Yes. Yes.
And he cites the linguistic difference between having sex and making love. You know, like it's having and being mode.
Totally.
Or being in love, I guess you'd say. It's fascinating. Yeah, it's fascinating that it is a language game, right? It is, I mean, the language, it's not just because you're not doing it consciously, right? As you said in that moment when your wife comes up to you, but you are enacting the itness of her.
Yeah.
Until you realize she's hurt. Then you are enacting the thou-ness of her.
Yes.
And it goes from, the I that's controlling the it or possessing the it to the I that's relating to the thou.
Yeah.
And that's really fascinating.
Yeah.
And relationship is primary. I mean, that's one of the big revelations I've had exploring your guys' work. It's like, it's just.
Yeah, totally.
But we're kind of deceived by language in a way. Like we think the words are the thing. Yeah. Or at least they're mapped one-to-one to a thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's not really the case. You know, it's always, you're reading between the lines, to use that metaphor, to actually get in touch with the context of what's going on.
And therefore, like the word, if we think of the word is more like the deeper grammar.
Yeah.
Right. Which kind of, or, something like the structure of being, right? Of our being.
Yeah.
So you could say that in some sense, the circling method is really about that difference. Right. Of having, and just to kind of bring some more meat on this too. The other thing he says about I, thou, and I, it, he says, a thou, right, could be a person, but it could also be a sunset, right? It could be a flower. And here's the distinguishing thing that he says. He's like, it's not just when the sunset glows, but when it glows in a way that addresses you. It's this personal address, right? Where the I thou encounter comes in being, right? So when the flower not just is beautiful, but it's actually in some way feels like it's addressing you.
Yeah.
Right. That's the key, is this addressing one another. And I would say that if you think about this, most of the time, I would say most conversations lack this address, right? Usually when I'm speaking, I'm not actually addressing you. You are kind of this generalized other for which I'm riffing about, like you may become, we have this term in circling called like captive audience, right? Right. In some sense, we know we all have relatives that do that a lot, right? But this it's much rare to actually address and be addressed by, right? And you would say that's a completely different world self-structure that goes on. Now we're inside of something completely different. And it's got this quality of the only thing happening in that moment is you and I.
Yeah.
Right. So I've noticed in this conversation, I noticed yesterday, there are these moments where I was like, oh, I forgot about time. Like I think yesterday was what, maybe 3-4 hours, right?
Yeah.
You could say that there's this co-addressing that happens. And then I would say in more kind of philosophical dialogues, that intimacy gets turned to the verticality, right? And then we're both being co-addressed by this other forming thing that we're both getting at the same time, right?
Yeah.
And this is where it becomes, what do you call, what's that great Greek word? Anagoge.
Anagoge,
right?
Yes.
Where
it's the reciprocal opening.
The reciprocal horizontal, right, starts to go this way, where it starts to go up, right, in the levels of being.
Yes,
right?
yes.
That's, I would say, that's what circling is really attempting to train ourselves into doing, and the capacity to do that. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is this, and well, speaking of time, like we have come, believe it or not, to the end of our time.
Wow.
And it's gone really fast again.
How long have we been going?
Well, I don't know. I don't have a guy here.
Yeah.
Close to 3 hours, I think.
Yeah.
By my clock, could be wrong.
Yeah.
But I want to ask you one last thing, I guess.
We're doing the Rogan thing. So at this point is where the real shit comes out. Yes.
Yeah. The, so I, it, I, thou, it sounds like we're relating to something like a label of something, the glass, right? As if it is a static object.
Yeah.
But that is a decomplexification of what is true, because what is true is this glass is a process, right? Like if we look at it through God's eye lens over enough, I don't know, thousands or millions of years, it's going to disintegrate, right? And it was fabricated and it will disintegrate.
Yeah.
And so the it seems to be labeling the dynamic process as a static entity.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the I thou is addressing it more as you're both engaged in a dynamic coupling, right? There's a different I that's arising and there's a different thou.
Right.
And so when it's a dynamic coupling, you can have more of this reciprocal opening, love, discovery, all of these things.
Yes.
You get deeper, between the categories to either more categories or an unspeakable understanding, perhaps, right? Like, I like that saying, you don't learn to swim by reading books.
Yeah.
Like you have to get very intimate with water and just feel it and move.
Yeah.
You can read all the books.
You have to bear it.
You have to bear it. You can read all the books about Kama Sutra that you want, but it's not going to teach you how to make love. Like you have to do it ultimately.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so is there in this distinction, a recognition that being itself is ultimately a becoming?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like it is all process. It is all relational. It is all always unfolding. No man steps into the same river twice, et cetera, et cetera. Is it related to that? Yeah,
I would say it's like my current way of like thinking about it is it's actually that we occupy the metaxu, right? Like for human beings in particular, like we're between, temporality and eternity, infinity and finiteness, right? Like we are an in-between fundamentally.
Yes.
And it's interesting because we are very unthing-like, you know, if, you know, oftentimes they say, if you want to get enlightened, just sit down and look for yourself.
Yeah.
And then you'll realize 20 years later, like, what self, right?
Yeah, right.
Another way of saying that is we aren't an object. We can't ever become a thing.
That's right.
We are a relation.
Yes.
Right. In and through other relations.
Like the world.
Yeah. Like the world.
Yeah.
And and the thing I want to just like say, it's not like circling says you need to be in an I thou relationship all the time, right? If you would never get anything done.
Sure.
Right. Like,
sure. Yeah.
But this ability to know that that's possible, and this ability to drop into that.
Yeah.
Right. You know, and the listening, I think, is the key component to that, which is, and also one of the things about circling, because when it first started, you know, the first modes of it were we would have a men's circle out on the beach every I think it was Wednesday for a couple of years. We started doing these retreats, 3-day retreats up in the mountains where we'd have people come, and then people would be on the source team, and pretty soon it got so big, the source team got like, we had 80 people on the source team and like 8 people in the participants, right? This is kind of like the beginning on how circling really, really got formed, right? But for me, the problem is that there was we kept having these relational experiences, and there was this more. And the problem was in the beginning is that the only kind of language hands, you know, you think about language as a way of grasping, of touching, right? Our only language hands that we had at the time were like human potential movement kind of language, like self-improvement, you know, Bay Area. That's all we kind of understood, Maslow hierarchies and stuff like that. And that was able to like grip it to some degree, but not this thing that receded, right? And that's the thing that I just kept noticing, and been just like you were talking yesterday, I was appreciating your things perplexed you that should, I think, perplex everybody, but no, they perplex you. And that's part of what opens this thing up. It was kind of like something very similar to that. And I think that the attempt to, and it bugged me that this language, we didn't have the language for it. Like, and I didn't even know Wade didn't have the language for it. It bugged me. And I was like, well, whatever this thing, this withdrawing thing, like, you know, and that's what actually led me into start to spontaneously go to Barnes and Noble, get high on coffee, and start gripping into Being and Time of all books. Right. And I didn't understand it at the time, but I think phenomenological language, right? This sense of, because hermeneutic phenomenology is this sense of where it basically evokes wonder, right? It's like it's not just your experience, right? But it's getting to the essence of your experience, which is nearer to you than yourself. So it was this language that would reach into these places, right? And then Merleau-Ponty, and then all of the other existentialists, and, you know, which led to Buber and all these kinds of things. And I now realize that I was intuiting something, right, about circling, that it was being put in the wrong domain, right? I would say that roughly the self-improvement ethos, right? The self-improvement ethos is exactly what circling isn't in, right? Circling, in fact, it's one of the things that we kind of start talking about this when we do a circling session. We talk about the only thing that we're doing at the bottom of it, our intention is just to sit together, is to see how profoundly we can be with what is. We're not solving anything. There's no problems that we're solving. There's no healing that we're intending. if any of that stuff happens, it's not our fault, right? You know, because paradoxically, a lot of that stuff ends up happening. And I realized that it's a completely different attunement. It's like what we discovered was something other than the technological attunement that I think we're all in, right?
I see.
Right, which is, the technological attunement is Heidegger would say, and somehow this motherfucker figured this out in the 30s. I'm like, I am just perplexed by how he was able to do that.
He's one of the greats.
Yeah, like, man, and that has just been so prophetic and continues to be, right? His sense of that, yeah. And he would say, the essence of technology is nothing technological, right? It's a mode of revealing. And in particularly modern forms of technology is a mode of revealing that reveals all that is as a resource to be optimized, extracted through instrumental rationality, right? To collapse distances, to smooth things out, right? And that basically explains our pre-reflective axiomatic way of approaching anything, right? Even our bodies. I mean, like, we're all in that, right? It is our understanding of being as such. Therefore, all beings, it's contained within, and increasingly so. It's very difficult to see, but when you see it, and this is one of the things he said, he's like, you know, basically, there's nothing you can do about it. It's the train has left its station. The best thing that you can do is continually see the uncanniness of it, the weirdness of it, right? The strangeness of it. And that there's something about this that we can maybe write it beyond itself in some way, right? Circling is not that. Self-improvement is all about that, like that whole ethos. And it, after a few years, I started to realize, like, through the help of Heidegger and like a lot of different people, of realizing, like, no, it's not a technological attunement, right? We're in what I guess Heidegger would say is a poetic attunement, right? A different way of an attunement. Now, it's interesting to think about this word attunement is really something, right? When you really think about it, right? This is a deep thing, right? Because when you tune an instrument, for example, the way it's tuned holds sway through everything. It holds sway through the instrument, through the tone, right? Yet it's neither the instrument nor any of the tones, right? It's like, it's fundamental, yet it's none of the things, right? In this way. So your fundamental attunement is a big deal. It's what holds sway. And so you could say in a poetic attunement is this way where we're not seeing the world as resources to optimize and to improve, right? But it's almost like we're seeing you, me, and I as wholes that are unfolding, right? That essentially there's a sense of our being present to what is present, and this deep being with is that there's something already whole there, right? There's nothing missing, yet it's not all revealed. And there's a way that we can be present with it such that it invites it to unfold, this notion of unfoldment, right? And so when we're with each other, with that sense, right? This is I thou, right? It's like, I'm not seeing you as a means to, you're a whole in yourself, right? And that yet there's something that shines forth that's not totally revealed. Yet there's a way I can be with you that honors that actually invites that unfolding. And that unfolding unfolds me, right? And there's these different levels and layers of relationality that can really be quite profound, right? And life-changing.
Man, it's beautiful. It's deep as hell. Like, it's so... I want to say something like, always go back to life, liberty, property is like one of the main, if we just need like this secular definition of how should people be, it's like if they could just respect each other's life, liberty, and property, and, you know, otherwise do whatever you want, more or less, like as long as you respect these things. And I feel like that creates the conditions perhaps in which we can, you know, we're always going to be the means to one another's ends to some extent, right? That's what contract is. That's what employment is. That's what the economy is. Like we need all that because that gives us more higher standard of living, more free time, more leisure. And there's a whole book about leisure being the basis of civilization, right? Like we need all that leisure time to sit around and philosophize and pontificate and trial and error and inventio, all this stuff. So you need that to kind of, you need the I-it relations even between thous to some extent, right? I need to be able to reduce you to, you know, my plumber or my employee or my boss or whatever the thing is. We need that. It's very pragmatic and essential to actually open up more space for us to have more, not only more humans, first of all, we increase the carrying capacity of the planet, but then we also can create moral philosophies, right? And we start to engage, we start to develop language like I, thou, and distinctions between I, it, and I, thou. And then we can do circling practices to improve our ability to relate to one another as thous. And so there's this strange, like, you're not saying like, eliminate this one and do all this one, because if you just did this one, you'd never get anything done, as you said. So we have to do this one to get things done, but then we need to also know that this is just a provisional architecture or ritual. And it's not the real, right? The real is, it's thou all the time. Like, I, thou, but the I is a thou, basically. And so
there's the between.
The between, once again.
There's the between.
And, I don't know. It's beautiful, but it, you know,
what's beautiful?
It's
what's the thing shining?
The beauty, like I'm almost saying beautiful, like where Vicky says, like beauty is where appearances reveal truth. And like I felt like the truth, the appearance of how you were speaking about all of that for me was unlocking something that feels very close to true. Which is again back to the metaxa. We're between these two things, the I, it, and the I, thou, and we don't need to say this is wrong, this is right, this is right, this is wrong. You know, it's that tonos, right? To hold the two things that are seemingly opposite in dynamic tension with one another. And it is through that dynamic tension that we generate goodness. You know, literally economic goods, but also, you know, virtue and all of these other things that make us human seem to come through that dynamism between these seemingly two opposites.
Yes, totally.
So, man, my mind, I think you just blew my mind.
It looks like it blew your heart too.
Yeah. It gives me an appreciation for just how complex this all is, but how much progress we've made, you know, like, this all might sound like a bunch of highfalutin nonsense philosophy to a lot of people, but there is a lot of substance here when you dig into it. And you're like, you might not propositionally have a handle on it, but like you're embodying it all the time, right? As the example you gave with the wife that comes up to you when you're busy and she's busy, like you're doing it all the time.
What we're talking about, actually, the most profound thing is that there's the ordinary, right? Like it's the ordinary in the way it conceals, yet reveals through that concealment. That is where it's like as Aquinas said, like God is that which is closer to you than yourself. Right? Like this paradoxical kind of background, this sense of things. So, and at one level, we're talking about like what's even pre-concrete, before concrete in a certain way.
God does not have abstract thoughts. It was Spinoza or someone. It's this very like contact epistemology, like just this in touchness, basically.
That thing that's kind of here now. Right? That thing that's like really here now.
And I think that's for me where I don't know if it's correct or not, I'm still wrestling with it, but that's what I'm invoking some of that when I'm talking about human action.
Yeah.
Right? Like we are acting right now.
Yeah.
Like we are being means to one another's end, but not just that.
Yeah.
Right. If it was purely means and I was purely instrumentalizing you, like using you as a guest, well, then there would be nothing. I wouldn't be supposing that there's something from you to learn. Yeah. Therefore, I could not be having a conversation with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there is an itness in that you're a guest on my podcast, but to have a genuine conversation, there has to be a thou-ness as well. Yeah. And they both have to be true in dynamic tension at the same time.
Which may speak to the question I had for you before is like, what's the difference that makes the difference between a badass like,
oh yeah, that's a good point.
And one is, I would imagine we're starting to expound on that a little bit.
Yes. Yeah. That's a great point.
Yeah.
The thou.
The thou. Yeah. Yeah. The thou.
Yeah.
Totally.
Seeing the thou of someone is very important. Yeah. Which you had a great idea earlier. I think this circling training would probably be especially useful for podcasters.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I've been thinking about that. I'm like, it's almost like that training is designed for podcasters because it's like, here's the thing. If you go to Barnes and Nobles, there's probably a whole section. I know there's a whole section on communication. Mm-hmm. But if you read most of those books, for the most part, they're all about speaking, what to say, when to say it, how to say it, right? And maybe there's an appendix or a chapter on listening. But man, I have to say, when you think about it ontologically, I don't think you could have speech without a listening. You could have listening without speech, right? You can imagine a listening, right? That doesn't call forth a speech, right? But I think it's impossible to go, okay, speech is always in response to a listening, right? There's this thing. And I've really found this to be the case in my experience of working with the circling method, is that all speaking, if it's good speech, it's attuned to the listening, right?
Oh,
it's this direct address, right? So it's almost like if you really want to get good at communicating, like get really good at listening. Yeah. Because if you're really, really addressing the person and know how to hear their listening, right? And hear what they care about, hear what's important to them, like then your speech is not something you have to make up. It's in response. It's just a caring response to what's happening.
A caring response.
Yeah.
To you're hearing the person. Maybe more than hearing, actually. You're sensing the person as a thou. Yeah. And then responding in care.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is so essential to having a good, meaningful conversation.
Yeah. Really caring. Yeah. Yeah. Really caring.
God, man, this has been awesome.
Really awesome.
Hey, two for two.
How about, I mean, we can cut this out, but if I just read this little thing I've been working on about wonder?
Please.
Okay, cool. So don't hold me to it. It's in mid progress, but this is, I think, kind of summarizes my current philosophical, poetic sense of things right now. So it starts off saying, the clearing of wonder towards an attunement with being. The essence of wonder is not easily grasped. In our everydayness, we are enveloped by the familiar, the known, the taken for granted. The chair upon one sits, the tree seen through the window, the voice of the other speaking to us. All are present, all are given. Yet, beneath this seeming clarity of presence lies a concealment, a hiddenness, which calls forth wonder. This wonder, properly understood, is not the effect of astonishment of the rare or the overwhelming. Rather, the silent event of being disclosing itself in what is most near. It is not a sudden rupture of the extraordinary into our world, but rather the quiet withdrawal of what is closest. The house in which one dwells, the room long inhabited, these are not mere objects. They are spaces of nearness, realms of dwelling. And yet, as we lean back against the wall, lost in thought, the familiar shifts. What seemed solid, reliable, opens. And in that opening, we glimpse a depth heretofore concealed. The wall moves, a hidden door is revealed. This moment of unconcealment is wonder. It does not reveal something new, but rather it brings forth that which had always been, yet remained hidden, awaiting the clearing in which it might be seen. Wonder and the withdrawal of being. Wonder is not a grasping of beings, but an attunement to the very clearing of being as such. To be in wonder is to stand in the openness of being, where the ordinary withdraws from the immediacy of its appearance and begins to show itself as more than it seems. This withdrawal is not a loss, but a gain. For in the retreat of the ordinary, the inexhaustible depth of the familiar becomes manifested. The world does not change, it deepens. Consider the encounter with the other, conversation, a glance, a moment shared. All of these may seem, at first, unremarkable. Yet, when approached with wonder, the other is no longer reducible to their role, their function, their outward appearance. Suddenly, they stand before us as irreducibly themselves, an unfolding mystery. It is not that they become something more, but rather that we see for the first time the depth that was always already there. In this sense, wonder is an attunement to the inexhaustibility of being, and thus to the inexhaustibility of the other. Wonder and curiosity, a necessary distinction. That's the title. Much is made of curiosity in our time, and rightly so. Curiosity, however, belongs to a different realm than wonder. Curiosity seeks to master, to know, to bring forth the unknown into the light of the known. It is a mode of questioning that remains bound to the will to power, the drive to make the world available, usable, and transparent to understanding. In curiosity, the unknown is a problem to be solved, a lack to be filled. The moment curiosity finds its answer, it ceases. It is sated and moves on to the next problem. Wonder, by contrast, does not seek to master, but to dwell. It is not concerned with solving the unknown, but with abiding with it. In wonder, the unknown does not diminish when knowledge is gained. Rather, knowledge deepens the unknown. For each answer points to a further question, a deeper mystery. Wonder does not resolve itself into certainty, but opens even further into the clearing of being, where what is revealed is the very withdrawal of presence, the abiding hiddenness of the world. In this sense, Wonder is not a mode of problem solving, but a mode of being with a hyphen between, being with. It attunes us to the endless depth of beings, not as things to be consumed or used, but as presences that continually reveal and conceal themselves. To live in wonder is not to accumulate knowledge, but to enter into an ever deepening relationship with what is. A relationship that transforms both the world and oneself. This is the last section. It's called The Unfolding of Wonder in the Everyday. To be in wonder is to dwell in a world that is always more than it appears to be. The everyday becomes the site of revelation. Not because something extraordinary has appeared, but because the ordinary reveals its hidden dimension. A conversation with a loved one, a walk through the familiar woods, a glance at the sky. All of these, when approached with wonder, open up a depth of being that goes beyond their immediate appearance. Wonder attunes us to the presence of what withdraws. The wall that moves, the hidden door that reveals itself, these are not merely surprises. They are events of unconcealment, moments in which being itself makes its presence felt. This unconcealment is not a mere showing, but a showing that withdraws, a revelation that does not exhaust the mystery of what is revealed. But for to be revealed is also to conceal. And in this concealment, wonder abides. Wonder and the mystery of being. Wonder, then, is not a momentary feeling, but an ongoing attunement to this mystery of being. It is not the culmination of knowledge, but the beginning of a deeper, more intimate relationship with the world. In wonder, we do not seek to possess or control what is revealed. Rather, we are drawn into a relationship with it, a relationship that deepens as we recognize the inexhaustibility of what is before us. The world, seen through the eyes of wonder, is not a collection of things to be mastered, but a field of presences that continually unfold. To live in wonder is to live in openness, to be continually surprised by what was once taken for granted, to find ourselves in a world that is always more than it seems. In this way, wonder is not merely an emotion or a state of mind. It is a mode of being. It is a way of dwelling in the world that does not seek to grasp or define, but to abide, to be with what is. And in this being with, we are transformed. For wonder calls us out of ourselves and into the depth of the world, where the mystery of being continually reveals itself, only to withdraw once more into its concealment. To live in wonder is to live in the clearing of being, where the ordinary is always extraordinary, where the familiar is always strange, and where every moment holds the potential for the revelation of that which cannot be fully revealed. Wonder is the path to intimacy with being, an intimacy that is not possession, but openness. Not knowledge, but reverence. Not mastery, but dwelling. In wonder, we are called to remain with the mystery, to let it draw us even deeper into the unfolding of its truth, a truth that is never fully grasped, but always open to be lived.
Wow. What a beautiful, great way to bring it to a close.
Yeah.
It was truly wonderful.
Yay.
And wonderful to talk with you.
Yeah, you too, my friend.
You've got to publish that. That's really good.
Okay, I will.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will. I was talking to my wife last night. She's asked, like, how'd yesterday go? And I was talking and she's like, oh, Guy, did you make a friend? I was like, yeah, I totally made a friend. Yes.
We're definitely birds of a feather.
Yeah.
That is for sure.
Yeah, totally. Yes.
Well, thank you, my friend, for doing this. This has been fantastic.
Thank you, received. It has been fantastic.
Any closing words of wisdom, or if not, you could just let people know where they could find you on the internet.
Yeah. So yeah, again, links are below. If any of the things about circling speaks and you want to learn about it and learn it, there's all those kinds of ways. I also work one-on-one with people. We'll include my email. You can just email me, and I work one-on-one. I also work with families, and I even go and live with families for a couple of weeks.
Oh, wow.
And do that. That's a whole nother podcast.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I bet.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much.
Yes. Oh.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, click here to find more just like it, and here to find our most recent episode. Also, make sure to like this video to help shine light on the corruption of money. And be sure to subscribe to this channel to stay connected.